Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this year's Student to NQP Learning Day. Absolutely delighted that we have over 600 people registered for this event, so it's brilliant. We will be starting at 9:30 sharp, but in the meantime, can I just ask you please to contribute to the word cloud by going to menti.com and entering the code 81480712. That's 81480712. And letting us know what do you most look forward to hearing about and learning about today. And you can submit as many questions as you would like to. So please join us on Menticom 81480712, and we will get ready to start in 6 minutes time. Thank you. Good morning, everybody, and really delighted to have you all join us today. It's brilliant to see so many people. I know that we've got over 600 people registered for today's events, so really excited about the agenda today and listening to the speakers. And thank you so much for filling in and being part of menti.com. As you can see, there are a number of key areas that you would like to see covered in today, and we will try and make sure that we do as much as possible to help you moving forward. It's great to see you all here. Just a bit about me. First of all, I'm Steve Jamieson. I'm the Chief Executive here at the Royal College of Speech and Language Therapists. I'm delighted to be able to chair this morning's event. It's a real opportunity for me to hear what you are experiencing, what are the issues that you want to address, where the concerns are, where the things that are going really well for you are happening and how it's working. And it's also helpful for me because then I can take all of this back to the staff here at RCSLT and to a board of trustees to look at what else we can do as an organisation to support you through your career. So I'm really excited about listening to all of you today and to hear what's going on. So let's first of all do a bit of housekeeping, get the boring part out of the way first of all, if that's okay. If you haven't, is there a slide? If you haven't already done so, please change your Zoom name by clicking the three dots on yourself and include your name. That would be really useful, so it can help us when we're going to questions later on. Include your name, your university, and either if you're doing a BSc or an MSc, that's also really helpful as well. And this will function as your virtual delegate badge as well, which I know you will find useful when you're hearing from other speakers as well. A gentle reminder that we will be recording the presentations from this event so that it can be made available on the RCSLT website afterwards. So don't worry about that. You may also use the chat function at any point of the day to comment on presentations and for technical assistance. So make sure that you do that. But please don't use the chat for questions today, as we'll be using Slido, and I'll detail how to use that in a moment. We love to see faces. So please do turn your camera on if you're happy and able to do so. And you may leave and re-enter the event at any time. The same link you have issued that has been issued to you can be used multiple times. So that's useful as well. We did ask for any access needs upon registration, but if anyone would like to mention anything throughout the day, please do have a word via private chat with Hannah Wright, available on chat as RCSLT host. And she would be more than happy to make any adjustments possible for you. And if you've requested closed captions, there should be a button on the bottom of your Zoom screen to enable this feature. A reminder that student membership is free, and we would encourage you to apply in order to take advantage of all the resources available to you. One of the great things about the Royal College of Speech and Language Therapists is that student membership is free, and I really want you to make good use of that moving forward. Please do tweet and network throughout the day via Twitter/X. I still call it Twitter, but it's Twitter or X, using hashtag RCSLT Student Day. We love seeing what you've posted and your comments. I also just want to talk about evaluation. We want to make sure that as we evaluate today's event to make things better, even better for next year, we would really want you to prompt to fill in the evaluation form. Your comments help us to shape and improve the future of our student days, so please take a few moments to complete one as we rely on your feedback. It's really helpful for us to think about how we can do things differently and better next year. Sponsors, I really just want to say a really big thank you to LCLAN, who are sponsoring Student Day this year. They are a specialist training provider that offers a wide range of courses. So thanks again to LCLAN. And if you'd like to further your knowledge in specific clinical areas, please do have a chat with them during the networking session if you're interested in learning more. Okay. So the aims and objectives today are to understand which essential skills and knowledge will be in demand in the future, that you can hear from managers who are currently recruiting newly qualified practitioners about what they're looking for in NQPs. I think this has been really helpful and was certainly very helpful when we did this session last year. Getting practical tips from NQPs on finding your first role and adapting to life as a speech and language therapist. Hear experiences from colleagues working as part of a multidisciplinary team, and to take advantage of a unique networking opportunity to help you begin your journey in the profession. It's so important for us all to think about how we network and develop our skills, develop our knowledge around our specific areas and the areas of interest. And this is one really great example of how we can do that by attending today's event. So thank you. I'm also delighted that we have got a large number of universities joining us today. As you can say, the university representation is fabulous. So thank you very much to all the universities for allowing this to happen. Thank you. And here is your NQP panel. So please scan this if you want to ask the NQP panel any questions. These questions will happen at the end of the sessions just before lunchtime today. So please use this QR code, and thank you for that. We have our NQP panel, and I would just like to say a really big thank you to the panel for agreeing to present today. We've got Taslima Ali, and I'm sure they will all introduce themselves anyway. Grace Flowers, Hannah Mitchell, and Jade Pidran winner. So really delighted that you're all able to join us and to take part in today's session. So I'll now pass to Taslima to be the very first presenter. They've all been told that they have got 12 minutes, so we will be keeping to time to make sure we get everything done. So Taslima, thank you so much, and over to you.
Hi everyone. I hope you have a good day today and you take a lot from today's session. I was in your position this time last year, so it's a real privilege for me to be here today. So quick introduction then. So my name is Taslima, pediatric speech and language therapist. I used to work as a teacher 10 years ago, over 10 years ago, and seeing children's experiences, the gap between those who need special needs compared to everyone else is what led me to speech and language therapy. So because I wanted to access these children, I wanted to upskill myself. Speech and language therapy appealed to me. And because I had a 1-year-old, I started the course as a part-time student, finished it in 6 years. I had a baby in my final year too. So I just wanted to show everybody you can do it. Despite the challenges that you have and you experience in life, it just takes a lot of determination and time management skills. So in applying for my role, the current role that I'm in right now, I started applying in my final year, and I got the job offer in March and I started in June. So I only just graduated in May 2024. So it's not been that long for me so far. Next slide, please. So one of the biggest things, I've put this slide on here, is I feel when you're starting this journey in finding your first job, it's important for you to know what do you bring to the table, what do you bring to the role, what is unique about you. And for me, the sort of like deciding factors and the things I felt was unique to me was being a mom of 2 children, my identity, my culture, my religion, my faith, all of these things, they're different, they're so different, but they're intertwined. And I felt it was very important for me to be, feeling spiritually well, physically well, and happy for my job satisfaction, as well as having long-term health conditions. So I needed to be very specific with the role that I'm looking for. And so these are the things I guess you need to kind of sit down and think, what is going to give me that job satisfaction? But at the same time, what are the conditions that's going to help me to perform my best in this role and give my best? So obviously for me, I have to think about things like school runs, pick up and drop off, um, praying in Ramadan, I'm going to be fasting, but also having health conditions like diabetes where I'm injecting insulin. Am I going to be traveling a lot? And so I just need to let you know as well, I am at home today. I'm not working from home, and my daughter is here right now. She's got very messy hand. Hold on, mommy. I'll speak to you in a bit, okay, mom? I'm just talking to my teacher, okay? Sorry about that, everyone. Next slide, please. So how did I find my job? So the nice thing is, so in my final year, because I had a newborn baby, I was on my final placement. It was very stressful already as it is. So what I did was I set up job alerts on Indeed. So that was brilliant for me because it meant I chose the filters that I wanted to give me the specific roles that I'm likely to apply for, and it all just dropped into my email. And the jobs that I felt, okay, that's not too bad, I'll go for that one. I applied for them through Track. And Track is brilliant because it stores everything for you. You don't have to repeat your application, your personal statement, everything is there, all the deadlines, everything is just nice and in one place. So when I applied for my first role, it was actually on my final year placement and I didn't get the job. So I was obviously that first rejection is gonna always really hit you and you're gonna feel really down about it. But always remember it's the feedback and reflection that you take from that that's gonna, develop you and make you stronger for the next one. So after my first rejection, I remember I had to have order my two-piece chicken and chips and really sit down and write, what went well, what did not go well. So from the things that did not go well, I knew, okay, these are areas I want to work on. This is what I'm going to change for next time. And with the feedback as well, I realized, you know what, I have a lot of strengths, so I need to be compassionate, to myself and really believe in myself that I can do this. And you need to really believe in yourself, and you're going to do that by writing it all down and really internalizing that. So when I did my next two interviews, again, so I could see my job applications were fine. I was getting through to interviews. So I changed the way I did my interview style, which was because I'm a very visual person. I'm a visual learner. I was writing down my answers before I was, orally saying them to the interviewer. And this is what worked for me. So I had my two job offers. Next slide, please. So it was nice to have my two job offers, and then it was about then weighing up which one do I go for. So remember in the beginning, I said, you need to write down what do you bring to the role and what is going to be, the factors that make it more sort of like possible for you to be more productive and happy with your job satisfaction. So this is where I weighed up my pros and cons. So for me, with everything that you saw in the second slide, um, being in one setting all day, so in my community clinical role, was better for me physically for my health. Being 30 minutes away meant I could manage my work-life balance. It was flexible. I could pick my days and my hours. Again, that's very important for me. And then most importantly, I guess, is the feeling you come out with from after the interview. It felt so natural. I knew that this is the team I'm gonna be myself in. It just felt so natural. Like I already knew them, and they even said that to me. Like it's like we've known you forever. So it was very very nice to come away with that feeling, and that doesn't leave you. Okay, whereas the second interview, it felt a bit robotic. It felt so clinical. Next slide, please. Okay, so when I was in your position this time last year, obviously I had a newborn baby and I was thinking, how am I going to work as a mom? I want to be the best speech and language therapist out there. I want to really maximize my skills, but how am I going to manage it? So this is just a quick overview. I'm not going to go through it in detail, but as you can see, I need to consider daycare and my oldest daughter, she's in school. So there's all of that. And I work 3 days a week. I have to be part-time to manage that work-life balance. I leave myself 4 days to do the household admin, and then obviously to consolidate the observations, the assessments, the analyzing, everything, the reporting from the 3 days of work, I kind of spend the next 4 days consolidating all of that. Next slide, please. So when you look at my working day specifically, so I started off in June with about 100 children as my caseload. And over time now, I've discharged a lot of patients. A positive discharge, always remember that, it's got to be a positive experience. I've brought it down to around 65. I work with children with from early years, mainstream and complex needs. And my day can look like this. Remember, this is really oversimplified because you may have to have a student call with your supervisor or, a Senko or a parent even. But one thing no one kind of tells you about in the actual role is there's a lot of admin. So even though I'm only seeing between 1 and 2 patients a day right now, it can take me, after seeing one patient, about 3 hours to write up the notes, and that's including, the planning, the analyzing, everything. It takes a very long time. Obviously, you get quicker over time. So my long-term goal, obviously, by this time next year is to double the amount of patients that I'm seeing and be quicker in everything that I do. But that will come with experience. Next slide, please. So my top tips for interview. I'm so sorry if you can hear background noise. Can you hear that? Can you hear that? No? Okay.
It's fine, Taslima. Go ahead. You're no problem at all.
Okay, sorry. Thank you. So my first tip is take advantage of the type of learner that you are. So when I did my first interview, I realized, you know what, I had all the answers in my head. I knew what I wanted to say. I was focused, but I just couldn't bring it all out as succinctly as I wanted to. So that's why I started to write my answers down and then say it back. It gave me that structure. I'm so sorry, everyone, if you can hear the noise. Sorry, Mom. Can you just... There you go. Okay, I'm so sorry. Yeah, second tip is don't assume that panel is an SOT. Okay, so I use the communication triangle a lot to emphasize and provide the examples of why I would do what I would do with a specific sort of case scenario. So if they said to me, you've got a child who is 4 years old, non-verbal, what would you do? I remember getting that for my interview question. I was like, oh my God, you really go into panic mode. But then I thought, you know what, I need to calm down. Let's talk through the communication triangle. And I went through each step and I was like, well, they wouldn't probably, would they get to understanding of language, their receptive language? I'd have to assess it through this, because I'm going to go through the attention listening. That's, foundation. And then you've got the social interaction, the foundation. You kind of go through each part. It's not linear. You got to remember, it's not always linear. And you just talk through it all as best as you can. Third tip is I've got this interview book. If I could just share my screen. Thank you. Can you see? So this is my own personal sort of like interview prep book. It's just a little pocket book, and what it does is every possible question that I might be asked in interview, I've put it on the first page, and I've got like my possible answers behind, and this gives me my structure of how I'm gonna say the answer in the interview when I'm gonna write it down and orally repeat it back. But it's all personalized to me. So I couldn't share this with someone because it's gonna be meaningless. So this is what I mean by sitting down, really finding out who you are, and then you can easily say that back without a lot of that sort of anxiety that comes with interviews. And then my fourth tip is get comfortable, be yourself. Honestly, just have fun. When you're being yourself when you're just talking passionately about something, and all these other ideas are coming out. And that's how you know that the vibe from that interview is right for you. Next slide, please. So one thing I wish I knew more about is EHCP. So I haven't had to write one yet in my role. I have got one coming up in January, and I've got training for it next week. So I'm hoping to consolidate my learning there. But that's something I would definitely brush up on before starting my role. And if you have experience in schools, if you are a TA right now, if you are SOTA at schools right now, definitely see if you can have access to any of these just to see what would be expected from you. Next slide, please. Supervision. So at the moment, I've had a bit of all three types of supervision: managerial, supervisional, clinical, and group supervision. They've been brilliant. I'm not going to go into too much detail, but it means you can really share, caseloads that you're going through right now, the complex ones especially. You get a lot of advice, you do. And you can just be open and honest about what's working for you, what's not, and put the changes in place, going forward. Next slide, please. Experience of MDT. So I haven't got that much experience in my current role because we are so clinical based. So I work mostly with Senkos and TAs. But as you can see here, I have had previous experience working with OTs, PTs, physios, psychologists, and dietitians. And it is important and meaningful to work with everyone, I guess, because you understand the patient better and you can upskill the other therapists, with communication skills so they can understand their patient better when they're seeing them in the absence of yourself. So I remember when I was on placement, I made a talking mats, and the OTs, the occupational therapists, they loved it. It meant they could really use it to gauge, okay, where is this patient, liking, disliking things in their therapy sessions, um, in their present moment. Next slide, please. Sorry, I'm rushing it a bit because of my daughter. She's just down there. Okay, final points. If you don't ask, you don't get, and you won't know. So don't be afraid to raise something that you are feeling anxious about. Honestly, sometimes I've just kept things in my head thinking, oh, I'll deal with it, I'll deal with it. But when I've spoken to my manager, I've come back feeling, oh, phew, so much lighter. And it means you can just get on with your next task more peacefully. And also, final placement can be really tough. Okay, it is. Sometimes it feels like you're a surgeon and you're gonna go and you're gonna make life and death situations. It is so tough, but remember, the actual job is so different, and I love it. I absolutely love it. I wouldn't change my job for anything. And then the final point is, how do you eat an elephant? What does that mean? It's about task management. Okay, so when you've got a mammoth of a task ahead of you, you take one bite at a time. That's how you eat an elephant, right? One bite at a time. And that's how you're going to manage your caseload and all the other tasks that you've got for your work-life balance. And that's all from me. Thank you. Oh yeah, and I'm going to pass it on to Hannah next. Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Hannah Michelle. I'm a Band 5 rotational speech and language therapist at University Hospitals Birmingham. I'm rotational and I'm currently in my acute rotation, so it's sort of general medicine. My last rotation was in acute stroke. So essentially what I do now is, so I work in a hospital and I cover all of the wards except for the stroke ward. Next slide, please. So just in terms of how I got here, so I started off by doing an undergraduate in linguistics and phonetics with Italian at the University of Leeds. And then I finished that degree. I graduated, I finished uni during the first lockdown, and was a bit stuck because I needed a job somewhere. So I got a job as a special needs teaching assistant. And it was through that some of my students had speech and language therapists, and I saw the job and I had a chat with them and thought, hey, that sounds really interesting. I could do that. So that's when I started looking into doing a master's. So I was successful at getting onto the MSc Speech and Language Therapy course at the Birmingham City University. So that was a 2-year degree, which I absolutely loved. And it was during that degree that I sort of originally I wanted to go into pediatrics, but it was during my master's that I realized I actually really love the slightly more medical side of things and the sort of adult caseload. So it was during that, on my final placement, I was with my current trust and my placement educator told me about some of the jobs coming up. So my trust has its own sort of recruitment platform called tal.net. So she sort of signposted me to that, and they've got all of the different jobs available. So I applied for this job using that, and I was very lucky that I got it first time. Although I guess that means I haven't had as much interview experience, but yeah, so I was successful in getting the job. Next slide, please. So just a little bit more about what my work week looks like. So at the moment, like I said, I'm working in a hospital and I'm ward based. So I currently provide dysphagia management in an acute general medicine setting. So I work with a lot of patients with Parkinson's, dementia, sort of non-stroke brain injuries, the elderly and frail population, some neurological conditions, and so many more. It's so varied. So at the moment, my kind of main role as part of my clinical caseload, so I'm doing swallowing assessments and reviews, attending best interest meetings and MDT meetings when needed. I occasionally do a little bit of communication, but I'd say in a sort of acute setting, in a hospital setting, we're mostly doing dysphagia management. So just in terms of my kind of average schedule, I start at 8 o'clock, and in the morning we sort of sit and make our coffees and sort of have a little bit of a catch up, and then at about 10 past we start going through our job list for the day, looking at new referrals, adding them to our work list, looking at any swallow reviews that we have, and just getting our job list organized for the day. We then have a whole team meeting where we allocate the patients. So at the moment I'm seeing usually between 3 to 5 patients a day, depending on how complex it is. And that's also leaving time for note writing as well. So yeah, I then, after patients have been allocated, I go out onto the wards, do all of my assessments, usually come back about 12:30, and that's when I sort of start writing my morning notes. So then lunch, if I have time, I'll see more patients in the afternoon, and then sort of finish up my notes and get ready to leave for about 4 o'clock. So alongside my clinical caseload, I also have some non-clinical responsibilities. So that kind of includes doing my CPD. I provide training to other members of staff at the hospital. Sometimes I support in completing audits and quality improvement projects just to kind of develop the service more. Just in terms of things I like about my job, I just love that I'm always learning something new. In hospital, you really do see patients with all kinds of comorbidities, so it's really interesting to always be learning. I work with a really great team. We all have really strong working relationships and get on really well. We do social things outside of work. We've just had our Christmas party last week, and it's really lovely. And I think because of that, I therefore feel really supported by my peers and my supervisors, and I feel like I'm in a really good position to develop my skills and career further. In terms of things I don't like, I don't always love the acute caseload. I've learned to like it more. I think it's got a lot more complex dysphagia, and sometimes I feel a little bit out of my depth. My personal main interest is stroke and stroke rehab, so moving into sort of an acute caseload was interesting. I think another thing, we also run a 7-day service at our trust, so we do occasionally have weekend working. So I just did my first shift on Sunday just gone, so I was here by myself, covering the wards by myself, so a bit lonely and wasn't very fun. And then I think one thing I think it's the same across all the different fields that SLTs work in, there's a lot of admin and note writing. There's a lot of time sitting in front of a computer and documenting, and sometimes I find it a little bit tedious, and I have to just get myself to get on. Next slide, please. So my top tips for preparing for interviews. I think a big one is to do your professional research. So checking to see if the team you're joining has a social media account, what they might be doing. Are there any new incentives or projects that they're working on? Even if it's not the SLT team specifically, if it's the hospital in general, and if you can kind of bring some stuff up that you've seen and show that you're really keen to join their team specifically, I think that fares quite well. Also thinking about what the trust values are and what their mission is. I know in all of the interviews at my trust, they always ask sort of, how do you align with our trust values? So it's good to know what they are. I think also reading and understanding a relevant piece of research that you can then bring up in the interview. So showing that, you're committed to that evidence-based practice, you're very aware of current literature, that stuff is always really, really helpful. I did see on the Mentimeter at the start that somebody was asking about cover letters as well, which I just thought I'd give you my 2 cents on that as well. I think a big thing that came up, so I've only recently just applied for a band 6 role as well, which I've now been successful at getting as well. And I think this was something that my supervisor told me, is that use headings when you're doing your cover letter. When you're writing your personal statement, you know, the job specification has the different headings of key skills, you know, essential, desirable, things like that. So if you split it into headings just to make it easier for the employer to kind of split it up. And then I think something else that's important is make sure you kind of have a point. So this kind of links in to my next point there, where so I use AI quite a lot to help me prepare for interviews. So in my most recent one that I did, I sort of typed in, I provided ChatGPT with the job description and the key skill requirements and stuff like that. And then I asked it to give me 20 questions that I might be asked in my interview. And this kind of gave me some prompts to be able to go through and then think of some experiences, think of various things that I've done on placement or in my roles where I've demonstrated all of these skills. And then this kind of helped me prepare some answers for each of those questions. And then it also meant that I could sort of give those questions to my friends and they could ask them, and then I could actually practice saying them out loud and sort of get a little bit of a script ready, because I know it can be really, really nerve-wracking and you can stumble over your words a little bit. So that was really helpful. But yeah, so just having a point, a sort of, I always remember, if you, next slide, I don't know if the animations will happen. So I always think of it a bit like what I was taught in my GCSE English, where it's PEE, point, evidence, explain. So you make your point, you give them the evidence. So for example, so I have good communication skills. This has been developed through me regularly attending MDT meetings. And then I think this makes me ideal for the role because I understand the importance of good communication and collaboration with the MDT for holistic care. So making it really clear and providing sort of all those steps in the interview, just so it's very easy for your employers to say, yep, tick, they're great. Next slide, please. So completing my NQP goals and my experience of supervision. So I'm very lucky that in my trust, I have regular 6 weekly supervision meetings with my Band 7 line manager. So these sessions are really useful because I can discuss interesting cases or talk about how I'm achieving my appraisal goals or what I need support with to achieve them. I find these very useful because I know that personally I do a lot of verbal reflection. So when I was having to do all of my written reflections all through uni, I found it so difficult, but I found that actually verbalizing it is the way that I reflect best. So it's really useful being able to go through these cases and sort of talk about them and develop my learning there. In terms of my NQPs, I have a preceptor, so another member of the team, a senior member of the team. She guides me through my NQPs. She answers any questions I have and gives me feedback, and she signs them all off for me, and I have regular contact with her. So anytime I complete any of my NQPs, I can have a chat with her. I'm still completing my NQPs at the moment, and I have monthly CPD sessions which I can use to complete my NQPs. So I'm very lucky that it's kind of structured into my non-clinical stuff through work. I've recently had to focus on my dysphagia competencies, which I am now completely signed off on. So my NQPs have kind of taken a bit of a backseat, but now I've been successful in achieving my Band 6 role. I need to get them all done before I start that. So like I said, I've also been completing this preceptorship course, which my trust puts on, and it kind of focuses on a lot of the kind of extra clinical skills, which has been really useful because I've been able to use some of that as my evidence for my NQPs. But yeah, it's just been doing a lot of stuff like thinking about patient compliance and doing a little bit of the sort of psychology behind that, and that's been really interesting and really helpful for my overall development. Next slide, please. So yeah, just with the NQPs, they're not fun, but you just have to get them done. I think it's one of those things, once you get the job and you are practicing, realistically, most people are already doing all of those things, but it's just about sitting down and writing it out and providing that evidence and getting them signed off. I know me and some of my course mates, we sometimes do NQP Sundays where we go to a cafe with our laptops and go and have a coffee and get some lunch and just sit, and then we can sort of talk to each other and say, oh, well, what did you put down as evidence? And, you know, we can kind of brainstorm a little bit. Next slide, please. So some things that I wish I knew before starting as an NQP. I think a big thing for me was what the next steps would be. I know I'm guilty, I'm quite ambitious. So I was very much like, what's next? What can I do next? How can I progress? All that kind of stuff. But I think just having a better understanding of the timeline and what my trust expectations were, there was absolutely no rush for me to do anything. You know, my trust was very aware that I was still learning in my new role. So they were very good at, you know, as soon as I came in, they did say, okay, we need you to start doing your dysphagia competencies so you can really get stuck in. But they were very supportive with that. And yeah, like I said, just in terms of how career progression would work, I think something I was quite surprised by is that, you know, especially in moving into band 6 roles, there's not automatically going to be a job in your trust available. Sometimes you might have to think, oh, am I going to have to move trusts if I want to step up? But obviously that's probably quite far down the line for some people. I think also having a better understanding of how sort of local acute versus rehab and community SLT teams run. I know it's going to be so different in obviously the different areas across the UK, but I feel like that was something which really took a while for me to get my head around, sort of in like the West Midlands area, because it just covers such a vast area. I think also I wish I'd had a little bit more support and guidance in my note writing and documentation. I feel like I was only introduced to like SOAP notes in my final placement, and it really took me a while to get my notes right, and they were being checked by my supervisors and they were always making changes. So maybe a little bit more of that sort of from university. I think this one's another one. I feel like sometimes you might need a work cry. I think it can be really overwhelming when you first start and you're surrounded by people that seem like they know what they're doing, and it all gets very overwhelming. And I think it's just to know that that's okay. It is, you know, starting, especially if it is sort of your first job after university, it can be really overwhelming, but you just get it out and then you crack on, and usually, you know, your team is very supportive. And I think everyone's done it at some point. I definitely have. Next slide, please. So my experience of working as part of an MDT and what I've learned. So in my roles, especially when I was in my stroke role, I was attending daily MDT meetings in the morning, and I think it just ensured really good communication with all the other MDT members, and it sort of ends up being really sort of holistic and comprehensive care. You've got a really good understanding of where the patients are every day in their care. I think I felt very respected and listened to by a lot of the staff. So in that role, I was working with PTs and OTs, dietitians, the medical team, nutrition nurses. We work with ENTs as well, the nursing team, social workers, that kind of thing. I think my kind of top tip when you are starting to work as part of an MDT is to really seek out shadowing opportunities as much as you can. I found it so helpful to get an understanding of other people's roles. Oh, I think my slides have just gone.
Just bear with us, Hannah. We're trying to get it back again.
No, that's okay.
You keep talking.
Okay, hang on. I think I've got them written down in front of me. So I think I just found it really, really helpful to be able to understand other people's roles and how they can support SLT. So I know recently I've just had the opportunity to shadow one of the physiotherapists doing some chest physio. Because I know there's been a few times when I've seen a patient for a swallow and said, yeah, they'll benefit from chest physio to clear their secretions. And I didn't know what that looked like, what that consisted of, but that's been really, really helpful as well to understand how that feeds into our assessments. I do think since being on my sort of acute general medicine rotation, I work very closely with the dietitians. They're in the office next door and we're always popping in and talking to each other. Same with the nursing and medical staff, and occasionally, you know, physios, but it's mostly from a respiratory perspective. But I think sometimes it is a little bit more difficult because certainly at my trust, SLTs aren't based on the wards. We kind of pop around everywhere. So it's kind of harder to manage that shared decision making, and you have to really rely on strong communication and timely communication with the medical team to make sure that things are done when they need to be done. Next slide, please. Oh, I did have yeah, my final points. So yeah, just in terms of my sort of final points, and the takeaway is, you know, you really aren't expected to know everything. Your first few months of qualification, I always think, are just like learning to drive, and you learn the most when you are finally on your own. You're never fully on your own. You should always have some kind of supervision and some other people to sort of rely on and learn from. But it can be, you know, your first few weeks when you're there, a bit like what Taslima said, when you're having to make your own decisions for the first time, it can be a little bit scary. And sort of linking into that, it can take a while to feel comfortable, and you will have imposter syndrome. But I think just remember, you've finished your degree, you've passed, and you're more capable than you realize. You wouldn't have been passed if you couldn't do it. I think ultimately, you know, sort of echoing what Taslima said, being an SLT is an amazing job. And despite all of the challenges, I absolutely love what I do. And I couldn't recommend it more. Anyway, that's me. Thank you very much. And I'll pass you over to Grace now. Thank you.
Thanks, Hannah. Hi, everyone. I'm Grace. And am I okay to just go straight in?
Yes, absolutely, Grace. Yeah, carry on.
Perfect. So just a little bit about me. I'm from South London, Kent area, and I actually completed an undergraduate degree in speech and language therapy, and I graduated last year. So I've been an NQP now I started in August, so just over a year. I'm actually on the waiting list for ADHD, so quite a lot of this I'll probably make reference to that. I'm kind of navigating my own self-diagnosis journey, and I found it challenging to navigate my ADHD in the workplace, but I'll speak a little bit about that as well. And also just worth knowing, I have an acting background. I completed a foundation degree in acting before my degree, and I also plan to study a master's in drama therapy at some point in the foreseeable future to see how I can combine the two professions. Next slide, please. So just a bit about my role. Still an NQP, band 5, and I work for a company called Cognos. So Cognos aren't an NHS in the NHS sector, but they're not in the private sector either. They're owned by Sutton Local Authority. So our company is commissioned by the council, and we go out into schools to deliver therapy to children with EHCPs. So I found out about it because it was my second year uni placement. So I was really lucky in that I really enjoyed my time with Cognos, and I kind of was vocal about that. So I would recommend, if you have a placement you enjoy, be vocal that, or you're looking for somewhere for a job afterwards, and that you'd be interested, because if they like you and you like them, the likelihood is they'll say, come back to us when you've graduated. I work across mainstream and specialist educational provisions. So I work in one mainstream junior school that has a specialist autism base. I work in one mainstream secondary and one mainstream infants. And I think after I've been in the post a little bit longer, I can maybe get rid of a couple of schools and hone in more on one. So for me, it'll probably be the autism base and specialist schools that I'll look to spend most of my time in. But for now, just to get a range of skills, I'm across all different types of schools. We're quite lucky in that we get to do assessment and therapy delivery. I think NHS is quite a lot of clinics and mainly assessments if you're speech and language therapists, and it might be the assistants that deliver the therapy. But that's one thing I really enjoy about my role, is that we get to do a lot of the therapy too. And yeah, I support young people with a range of diagnoses, so primarily autism and ADHD, but more recently selective mutism. I have some children with trauma backgrounds and adverse childhood experiences, Down syndrome, etc. Next slide, please. So this is what my working week looks like. I only work 4 days a week because I came into the job knowing that my time management skills weren't amazing. And I knew that I would burn out. So quite frankly, I just said at interview, I said, I held my hands up, I was honest. I said, I struggle with this, I always have. This is what I'm putting into place to try and help me, but I know in myself that I will be able to practice as a much better speech and language therapist if I'm working 4 days a week. And quite often that Friday, even though it's a non-working day and it's unpaid, for me, there might be a little bit of work that I do in the morning if I've just burnt out one day. Often I'll get on with some competencies on the Friday. Sometimes I just take that day off because that's what I need. But that's typically what my working week looks like. So 3.5 days clinical, and then Tuesday afternoons are usually for admin. And I usually see about 4 children a day. This is increasing as I kind of finish my competencies. Oh yeah, and worth noting that admin time is things like journal club, extra training that the company organises, time for supervision, and time for competencies, but that's usually the last thing on my list, unfortunately. Next slide, please. Just a screenshot of my Outlook calendar, which is my best friend. For me, if it's not written down, if it's not blocked out on my calendar, I forget it exists. So I really love time blocking, just to make sure I'm holding myself accountable. But I think, I can't remember who said it, Taslima, I think this is quite oversimplified. There'll be things that come up that you don't expect. So quite often my meetings will be rearranged, and it's trying to navigate that every week. Next slide, please. This is what I look like at the end of every week. This is usually me on my Fridays or at the end of the day, especially if it's been a busy day. But I think it's just recognizing that our job is demanding and you are likely to feel a bit exhausted sometimes or a bit tired, and that's okay. We're working our socks off. We've got the responsibility of clients and young people that kind of need our support, and so it can be tiring, but there is support out there. I think next slide, please, is my supervision one. Yeah. So as part of my company, I get one-to-one clinical supervision. And this started off once a week, and only when I felt ready did it reduce. So now I have clinical supervision about once a month because I don't feel like I need to touch base with my supervisor every week. We also have supervision hubs, which take place every Tuesday afternoon for half an hour, and we're grouped into, they're kind of random groupings actually, but we just have a chance to vent, to bring tricky cases, and to just chat about things that might have come up in the week that we need support with. I have one-to-one managerial supervision once a term, and that's for more admin based things, like not admin in terms of clinical notes, but admin in terms of HR bits and contractual things. I have peer supervision, which happens once a term. I've been lucky that my peers are also NQPs, or they've just kind of progressed to a full band 5 position. So that can look however we want. Quite often it will be in the office, sometimes it'll be a Teams meeting, sometimes it'll be in a cafe with a cup of tea. We can kind of be in charge of how that looks, which is really nice. And just overall, we have a supportive team. It took me a while to feel confident to reach out if I needed help, but we've got a whole Teams chat. People are more than happy to help you out if you need something. Quite often I'll put a message on there if I've got a case. So for example, I had a selective mutism case come onto my caseload, and I just popped a message on there and said, I'm struggling, can anyone help me? And they did, so that was great. Next slide, please. I've been quite lucky with my experience of working with MDTs. So quite often, usually on a daily, if not once or more weekly basis, I will carry out joint sessions with occupational therapists and drama therapists as well. We don't have drama therapists in the team, but we do have drama therapists working at a lot of my schools. So I've kind of sought them out so that we can link up and support the young people and the children as best as we can. I set up therapy team meetings at my school that has an autism base. So that's just a chance for, we've got ELSAs, we've got intensive interaction practitioners, drama therapists, OTs, speech and language therapists. It's a chance for all of the therapists to brainstorm to see where we have crossover with our caseload, and to just kind of make a plan of action going forward. A lot of my work is with teaching staff. So I will speak to teachers and TAs, I will provide them resources, I will show them how they can carry over the skills into the classroom. Sometimes we have TAs come into sessions, but they're really busy, so that doesn't always happen. But yeah, I have a lot of communication with teaching staff, as well as parents. Even though we're based in schools, it's important that we speak to parents, particularly for some children. So I do have communication with them as well. Sometimes TAC meetings are called, so that's a team around the child. So if professionals are really struggling, the SENCO, for example, will call a meeting and all professionals involved will come together and just brainstorm, okay, what are we doing? What's not working? How can we go forward? And the last point, yeah, I also work with ed psychs, social workers, behavioural specialists, intensive interaction practitioners as appropriate. I love working as a multidisciplinary team. I love drawing on other skills from other professionals. I find it really helpful if I've, for example, got a child that's really dysregulated. I will go to their OT and say, what do you use? What can I do to increase their attention, to support their regulation in my sessions? I think it's so important that we draw on other people's skills. Similarly, we can offer our skills and our advice to professionals, but there is limited time. There's a lot of demand, there's lots of things to do in this job, and sometimes it's tricky to constantly be in communication with other professionals. Next slide, please. This was me before interviews. I get super nervous, I overthink, I am a nervous laugher, I really struggle. So I thought I'd add this in here. It's okay to be nervous, you will be, it is scary, but at the end of the day, they just want you to be yourself. They don't want you to fail. They would love you to have you on the team. They want you to succeed. You want to succeed. So just try your best. Next slide, please. So I think something that's always come up for me in interviews, there is always a safeguarding question. So familiarise yourself with the safeguarding policy, and just know in your head what that protocol looks like, in terms of what you would write in your notes, without it being. So keep in mind what's confidential, what you'd write in your notes that's kind of accessible to everyone. Familiarising yourself with the safeguarding leads at the school, just that kind of thing. It will come up, so make sure you are prepared for that one. Something I found helpful was to just have a list of assessments and therapy approaches that I had experience with from my placements, just so I could come in and already say, look, I've done the CALF, I've done the TALC, I've done these assessments, I feel confident with them, or I don't feel confident with them, but I know what they are. Know your strengths and weaknesses and be honest. Like I said, I came in, I held my hands up, I said, look, I struggle with time management, because there's no point sugarcoating things or saying that you're amazing with time management, because the truth will come out. It is a challenging job. So if you hold your hands up at the start and say, these are things I struggle with, but I recognise that these are steps that I'm taking to try and support myself at the moment, I think they would appreciate that honesty. And the last one, prepare questions for them. You're interviewing them as much as they're interviewing you. You need to find out, is this a company that I want to be part of? something that I didn't do was ask what support they had for people with ADHD, because I was at the beginning of my journey then. I didn't know what questions to ask. I wish I had asked that, because that's quite tricky to navigate now that I've been here for about a year. But what perks do they have? What's supervision like? Just get to know the company as best you can. Next slide, please. I love a GIF, apparently. But this, again, is me running away from my competencies. So just to make you all feel better, I've been in my role now for a year and 2 months, and I'd say I'm about 25% of the way through my competencies. So I've got a long way to go, but a lot of that has been recent. So I would say leave them for the first, my advice anyway, is to leave them for the first few months at least, until you've gained some clinical experience, because you'll struggle to you'll struggle to find things to write about if you try and do them on day one. Accountability is key. So I think Hannah mentioned about having the competency Sundays, which is a really nice idea. I might steal that. I might suggest that to my friends. But something I do is I've said to my clinical supervisor, can we meet every other week, just a 10-minute meeting, so that I have to bring something of my competencies to show you, because otherwise it does just get pushed to the bottom of my list. So we now do that, and that has helped. It's recognizing sometimes other things are priorities, and don't beat yourself up if you can't get anything done that week. I found it really helpful to keep my competencies Word document open at all times on my computer. So if I do something, I quickly write it down, just so that I haven't forgotten about it. I can come back to it later, polish it, expand on that, but just so it's written down. And last point, speak out if you're struggling, because people want you to be okay. They want you to feel supported. Yes, next slide, please. I think this is my last one. Just remember that you can't do it all, especially when you're starting out. You can't do it all. So learn that skill of prioritization. I'm still doing that now, but this job has really pushed me to improve that skill. But prioritize. Don't do the nice things that are due really far away down the line. Get the things done that are important, that are stressing you out. Just get them done. You'll feel so much better for it. Something that someone said to me is that our job is important, but we're not an emergency service. And that really stuck with me, because you will have a lot of responsibility, and the demand is high sometimes, but it's knowing that, okay, you can only do what you can do. And that will be more than you think. Be kind to yourself. Know that you're more than capable, but please speak up if you're struggling. Like I said, that's something that I've only started to do recently. I wish that I'd done it from the start. So just let someone know. And your health comes first. We can't support children with their regulation and their needs if we're neglecting our own. So just remember that. I think that is all. Next slide, please. And I'll hand over to Jade.
Hi, sorry, my voice went then. My name's Jade. I'm currently a rotational speech and language therapist at NELFT, so working in the community. I graduated from University of Essex. Had a bit of a journey in university. So my kind of wanting to be a speech therapist actually came from my own personal experience of having a stroke back in 2015. I needed some speech therapy at the time, and it was a real eye-opener for me of actually how supported I felt by the speech therapist. They made me feel like a person rather than a patient, and I think that's what I really take forward with me as well when I'm working, kind of having that in mind of how important they were for me. I also had to have a bit of time off university, so I have Crohn's disease and had to have an emergency surgery. to have a stoma, so an ileostomy. And I was a little bit worried about what that's going to look like for me kind of in work. But I was really, really supported. And I think that's what I kind of trying to get to the point of, you can have kind of them long-term conditions, and it's just important to get that support in place. And there is that, not being afraid to speak up about getting that support. There's a lot of support out there that I found within our trust from occupational health and my manager. So yes, that was my kind of story as well into speech therapy. Lovely. And next slide, please. So yeah, so currently working for NELFT. So we have a rotational role. So I started off in community rehab, so working in stroke and neuro. We then had a rotation into our Redbridge post, which covers kind of general communication, also kind of an aspect of neuro, so kind of Parkinson's aspects like that, and also the general swallow. So it's kind of anything but stroke. That was covered by another speech therapist. And I'm currently in my post at the moment in Havering. So it's a voice rotation as well as communication and swallow. I also trained in the Lee Silverman voice therapy, and that's something that our trust completes. So I was able to kind of deliver that as well. Generally, I have a lot of variation of where I go. So I do a lot of home visits, but also working with care homes, nursing homes. I have clinic appointments as well for anyone that can come into clinic. As a service, we have our fees and our VF that we have access to, and we also have a joint ENT fees, which is covered by the band 6s and above, and they have their competencies in those, but I'm kind of involved in the referral for them as well. So our team as well, we're made up from band 5s to band 8s. We also have some great speech therapy assistants, and there's some assistants that are doing their apprentices at the moment, which is always a really nice reminder sometimes of university and kind of what they're covering. So it kind of checks back in with me with that. So I kind of get a bit of an update of kind of what they're doing, and a little bit of a reminder of what I was studying at university then. And we have a great admin team as well. Next slide, please. So my working week is very varied. There's not necessarily a typical working week, but generally my Mondays and Fridays have my voice clinic appointments, which can be kind of initial assessments. It can be ongoing therapy sessions. My Tuesdays, my Thursdays are a little bit more varied. So I have my swallows and my communication, and it can be really, really varied in the fact of there can be a lot of extra admin, so kind of onward referrals to the MDT, involved in kind of MDT best interest decisions as well, and kind of have lots of other things that can kind of impact on my working week. So we have our CPD, our supervision, which I'll talk about a little bit more as well, and also have a QI project at the moment. So our team has a lot of QI projects, but I kind of took a QI project on in the fact I was struggling a little bit with that caseload management. So as in my role, we're kind of very responsible for our own caseload and kind of allocating the time with that. We have obviously supervision with our band 6s, but it can feel quite a lot to start off with. So actually, I kind of spoke to one of the managers and like, why don't you turn that into a QI project? So kind of having that time to me analysing all that data, how much time do I spend on all the admin and the face-to-face, and how can I look at kind of balancing out a little bit more? So that's kind of ongoing at the moment, and that's been really useful to get me to know kind of the process of QI and actually how I can apply that. And it's been really good to kind of analyse that as well. We have team meetings, and we also have kind of our CBD meetings as well. So yeah, very varied. Next slide, please. So I have a lot of MDT working, especially in my first rotation. So the community rehab team, so it was made up of our clinical nurse specialists. So we have our stroke, MND, Parkinson's, etc. our occupational therapist, physiotherapists, generally, but we also have learned a lot from them. So I did a lot of shadowing, really got to know their roles, when to refer onto as well. And in my other rotations was working a lot with kind of GPs in best interest decisions, a lot of dietitians when it comes to kind of discussions a bit more with PEG feeding, lots of work with our community treatment team, and our district nurses. Sometimes we get referrals from them as well, and they will kind of keep when we know they're going out, they can kind of pick up on different things within our notes. We also say with dysphagia in the community, so our swallow caseload, we have lots of different gastro referrals, and in the voice we have ENT, and that was also sometimes with the swallow. So we get to kind of know their role and actually how that interplays with us, which has been really helpful for my learning as well. Working a lot with kind of charities, when to kind of refer on and signpost. Working a lot with kind of family members and kind of nursing staff as well. And that can even be kind of communication partner training, or having them aware of kind of the IDSI levels and kind of our recommendations and how that can fit in. So there can be lots of benefits I found with kind of MDT working. So it's kind of lots of joint working and goal setting. So I've had a really nice sessions where I've worked with kind of occupational therapy and physiotherapy with some stroke patients. We've done some sessions together in their home, which has been really lovely, and working on them goals together. Also had people that was really struggling to kind of self-feed, but we had some lovely sessions with the occupational therapy as well, and kind of we worked really collaboratively with that, which was great. A lot of shared knowledge between everyone. I've learned so much about their roles, and kind of I know kind of touching a bit on Hannah's point as well about kind of really getting them shadowing opportunities, and they can be really great, and even having an opportunity to speak to everyone in the team. So I talked a lot with our admin team and kind of what they do, and they taught me a lot actually of how I can kind of, they can support me in that. So they've been really, really great. And even kind of from our assistants, there's lots of knowledge that everyone has, and kind of collaborating together can be a really, really great experience for your learning, as well as theirs. There can be some challenges with MDT working in the community. So kind of availability for joint sessions, trying to get everything kind of in the diary can be a bit tricky. And kind of if they're available to discuss. And sometimes there can be a bit of confusion with kind of understanding of roles. So it's kind of really advocating what your role is, and other people's role is, and knowing kind of when to refer, and get everyone's support for that patient. Next slide, please. So how my kind of interview kind of process, how did I find the job that I'm in now? So I generally did a job search. So I used NHS jobs, track jobs, and Twitter, which I still call it Twitter sometimes. So yeah, so it's now X. And then what I did was I looked at the applications. So there was 3 applications that I kind of went to. There was a post quite early on in the year that I was really, really interested in. So but I thought, was it too early for me to apply? So I did email kind of the sort lead for that team, and asked, is it okay if I apply? Would you be kind of willing to accept my application at this point? Which thankfully they were. And then I kind of reviewed the job specification. What was their criteria, their essential criteria, their desired criteria? How do I meet those? Or if I'm not quite meeting them, how could I meet them? And I kind of put them examples kind of in my application. So thinking about, is there a placement experience where I kind of have met that criteria? Is there even previous experience that I might have had? So when I was volunteering with the Stroke Association, that I could kind of line those with. So I kind of included all of those. I had 3 interviews, so 2 were successful and 1 I was placed on the contact list. So my first interview was at an acute setting, and it's quite varied. So I had just 10 questions. That was kind of a bit of a mixture of questions. I think as kind of Grace mentioned, there's kind of generally a safeguarding question in there as well. I was successful in that interview. I then applied for a community adult post, and that was kind of a mixture of questions and quite more lengthy case studies, which I think I wasn't necessarily expecting. And I think I panicked a little bit in the interview, so I didn't kind of write the questions down. I kind of missed aspects and that I could have included in that case study. So my next interview, which is a different community adult post, which is my now current post, I kind of felt a lot more prepared. So I'd take that pen and paper with me, write them key points down, and kind of took a little bit more of my time. So it's not being afraid in interview to kind of take your time and kind of write them key points down. It made me feel a lot more comfortable. I could refer back to them. So yeah, so that was kind of one of my big tips. When it comes to accepting a job, so I had 2 successful posts that I could potentially take, but I really kind of felt, what is it? So I asked questions in the interview on each, and I was like, what is it that's going to draw me here? Why is it that I necessarily want to work here? And the post that I was in now offered kind of, I felt like lots of opportunities and aligned a lot with me, and how I wanted to work. So yeah, accepted this post. Next slide, please. So talking a bit about interviews, kind of top tips. So I completed some mock interviews with all of my kind of colleagues at the time, all the students, which I found really helpful because everyone else was kind of going on interviews around the same time. So they would kind of bring different questions and would have a little practice between us. Case studies as well, especially after that second interview when I felt a little bit more unprepared, was kind of looking at, was there any other case studies? How would I approach them? Kind of breaking them down a little bit. Really knowing the job role and the trust values and the description. So knowing that and kind of knowing from your application, so being really familiar with your application, kind of what you've put in there, and then using that. So kind of if they are asking any question, have you already done that on kind of placement? Is there any kind of things that you can bring, examples of maybe how you've done that? And prepare questions that you want to ask them. So it might be a case of knowing what it is that you're looking for the job, and that can really help you make that decision going forward as well. Lovely. Next slide, please. So I said I'll talk a little bit about my supervision. So we have structured supervision with my allocated supervisor. So that's typically once a month. But I was a bit worried in community that I kind of feel like I'd be a little bit by myself. That hasn't really been the case. So there's always people I can reach out to, especially I did my dysphagia training. So we had a 6-week or 5 to 6 weeks where we kind of do quite intensive dysphagia training, and then the kind of supervision kind of then decrease the bit. So I was checking in each time and I was able to go a bit more independently, and we still have that opportunity to discuss. And sometimes I still reach out and kind of be like, I'm really not sure 100% where I'm going here. I just want to talk it through because I find that really helps me. So there's kind of always the opportunity to reach out and speak to someone in the team, which was one of my biggest concerns at the beginning. We have peer supervision. So Band 5 peer supervision, I think, has been really great for me. It's a chance that, so there's people that have already done that rotation before. There's people that are in their Band 5 position for a bit longer or have just recently started, depending on how the roles kind of are changing and who's in the trust at that time. And it's really just it's an opportunity to not only kind of learn from everyone. Sometimes we do case studies, sometimes we do journal clubs, but it's equally a time just to share that experience of what it's like to be an NQP and be a Band 5. and kind of have that support there. So peer supervision has been really great. We also have currently my voice post, so we have our voice supervision as well, so we can talk about all of different cases, opportunity for some more CPD as well. As I say, we get them one-to-one discussions. I've also had there's always that opportunity as well to say, can we go out for a joint session? Can we see this person together? So it's a really great opportunity for your learning as well. And don't be afraid to ask for them joint sessions as well. Equally, I've had situations where I might have, especially kind of very early on in kind of my dysphagia training, where I'll be like, I'm not quite sure, but how do you approach that? You're kind of there with the patient thinking, okay, what do I do? So I very much don't be afraid to kind of say, okay, I'm just going to go and just seek some advice, but we'll kind of get back to you. It's kind of being comfortable with that and kind of making sure you're kind of following up with that. We also have our team meetings and our CPD meetings as well. So can we go to the next slide, please?
Yeah, can I just say 2 minutes left? Thank you.
Yeah, that's fine. I'll speed through them. That's okay. It's a little bit about kind of NQP competencies. So I've completed mine. The biggest takeaway, I think, from the NQP competencies, I had different supervisors that were kind of signing off at the time. So just making sure you'll kind of get together, kind of collaborating together, checking with your supervisor. I kind of stick to deadlines, targets. I like those. So I was kind of in each supervision kind of setting what I wanted to achieve and kind of looking at my caseload and thinking, can I add, what ones can I achieve, and kind of planning going forward. Next slide, please. Yeah, so final points. So you're always learning and adapting. You can always seek support, ask questions. Remember, you're bringing knowledge and views as well. So kind of don't be afraid to share that. You're bringing a lot of knowledge from, as I say, from uni, different ideas. So don't be afraid to share those. Reflect on what went well as areas as well. So sometimes I'm kind of found at the start, I was reflecting on where do I need to improve. Actually, then points where things that you've done really, really well can be just as valid, and can't you keep them with you? So kind of make sure you're reflecting on them points. Establishing a work-life balance at the beginning as well. You're kind of setting them standards for yourself. One thing I wish I'd knew was kind of that balance of non-clinical and clinical workload. I think that's something that I really struggled with at the beginning. So that's why I think doing the QI project has been really, really helpful for that. And asking for support. How do other people do it in your team, or generally, or even when you're on placement, if you have a final placement, asking how do they manage that? Get some tips as well. So yeah, so that's my final point. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Jade. And I'm sorry about that. We are going to be sticklers for time because we've got so much to get in today. But thank you so much to all of the NQPs. Some really helpful tips and hints there. And I think we can all pinch a few of those tips and hints from each other about how to move things forward. So brilliant. Thank you so much. We are going to have just a 5-minute break. So on my screen, it says it's 10:47. So that's what, 10:52 back again. So can I just ask everybody to grab a quick cup of tea and be back at 10:52. Thank you so much. Okay, welcome back, everybody. I hope you were able to grab a quick cup of tea or coffee. I'm sorry that the time's quite short, but as we say, there's so much that we want to get through. We've got the managers panel coming up next. And again, if you want to ask any questions to the managers, then please scan the QR code and we'll be taking these questions at the last part of this morning's session. So please use the QR code. I want to introduce the managers and I'm really delighted that we've got some great managers here today to answer some of the questions for us. So we've got Alison Kelly, Sophie Hutton, Anna Ray, and Debbie Gold. So thank you so much to all of you for agreeing to answer the question for us this morning. So I'm going to go straight into the first set of questions, if that's okay. And the first question is, when you receive an application as a manager, what makes it stand out for you? So I'm going to go to Debbie first of all for that one, Debbie.
Oh, hi. Yeah. So you may have already heard some of this from some of the other ladies that spoke this morning, but from my perspective, I like to be able to read it really easily and really nicely set out. It can be a bit tricky on NHS jobs applications in that it doesn't allow you to bullet points and things. So we would normally recommend perhaps doing it in Word first and having your kind of set what you would want to get over, and then copying and pasting in, also partly because people have been known to lose everything they've done and had to redo it in the past. So maybe leaving a space between if you get the chance, and being as concise as you can whilst trying to get the right information in, but also just really getting those details of your actual knowledge and experience relevant to the role you're applying for. So rather than just blast everything at your application, try and really tailor it to this person's specification and the advert that you're actually applying for, and kind of really pull out the things that are in that particular specification. And then hopefully what will happen then is we shortlist you based on how many things we can tick that you've put in based on our person specification. That's how it works. We kind of go, oh yes, you've mentioned that, oh yes, you've mentioned that, and then you kind of get a score, and that helps us decide to shortlist you. So so it's really important that you tailor it, but you've really read all the details of the job and the person specification to make sure you get that information in there.
Brilliant. Thanks, Debbie. So I'm going to ask the same question to Anna. Anna, when you receive an application, what makes it stand out for you?
In terms of the tailoring, it's very much sort of showing that they personalised it to our job and organisation. We're a community, it's a community adult job, so I'd want to see that there's a passion for working in community adults with the caseload that we have. Also, as Deborah pointed out about the person spec, it's really important that you do sort of put in the evidence for that, because if it's not there, you may well not get shortlisted. But to also consider when you're looking at that evidence, thinking about sort of highly transferable skills that you've had when you in other jobs, not necessarily speech and language therapy. So you may have been working as a waitress, perhaps, or in hospitality, where you've had to deal with complaints, work under pressure, team working. All of those skills are really relevant. So if you can tailor those in and not ignore, any other previous work experience that might be relevant, that would be helpful, and that does help them stand out.
Brilliant. Thanks, Anna. And Alison, same question.
Thank you. I'm just going to pick up on something that Jade said when she was talking to us earlier, and that is talking about the value that you're going to bring to the team as well. We really want to know what you're going to bring, the difference that you're going to make. And I always think of it as the value add. What is different about you that you're going to add to the team that you're joining? So as much as all the points around responding to the person spec are your priority, there needs to be your personality shining through as well. And I would say we are getting much better at finding a person spec that's been generated by AI. So try not to rely too much on a generated person spec, but personalize it and make yourself and your characteristics really shine through.
Yeah, really helpful. Thank you for that one. Sophie, same question.
Just adding on really what Anna shared around you really using that experience that you've had before. Everybody's going to have kind of a different journey coming into being a speech therapist, and don't put too much pressure on yourself clinically as a new practitioner, because everything else is so important. When I'm interviewing and when I'm looking for somebody, actually one of the most important things for me is somebody's values. Do they share the same morals as I do? Can I see how they would work as part of my company? And that comes through in many other ways other than kind of your clinical experience. And make sure you kind of get that into your application. Let us know about you, also what you're interested in, because I want to get to know somebody as a person as well, because first and foremost, we're working with people. We can teach clinical skills, so I want to know you as a person. So don't be afraid to put things that you're interested in. I love a bit of humour in applications that I read. That makes them really stand out and makes somebody become a person to me.
Brilliant. Thank you. All really helpful points. I'm going to move on to the next question, which is about interviews. And just ask, are all of the interviews that you do, are they all virtual, or are they in person now again, or a bit of a mixture? and how students actually prepare for the interviews. So I'm going to go, first of all, to Sophie.
So we always have kind of an informal chat with applicants first. So we will look at applications and then we'll kind of shortlist some. And we introduce ourselves. What we find is that means that our applicants are going to be more comfortable when we move into a more formal interview. I want to get the best out of somebody, and I absolutely can remember being in my early interviews, how nerve-wracking it is, not knowing what to expect, who will be there. We invite people to come in and meet us face to face, have a look at our provision, have a look at our kind of accessibility to therapies and what that looks like. That means that they can then go away. One, they can understand, okay, do you know what? I feel like I could see myself working with this company. And two, when they come back to us, it's allowed them to explore possibly in more detail how they may fit into our company. Also, it gives applicants the opportunity to let us know about any adaptations or anything that they may need. We want people to feel comfortable. An interview is already anxiety-inducing enough, and we want to, like I say, get the best out of our prospective employees.
Yeah, absolutely. Great, thank you. Anna, same question.
Yeah, so we've sort of opted to use like a mixture of tasks for an interview. So we do have traditional interview questions, and we will, make that as relaxed as possible. Can have the questions written down if that's helpful. Encourage people to take their time in terms of responding. I think somebody else mentioned about writing down key points. All of that would be really encouraged. We also usually ask for a prepared task, often a presentation, so that if somebody's not great at speaking on the spot, we might spot that actually they're quite good when they've prepared something, and a written task, which might be something like a session plan or something like that. And what we're also looking for is looking at what needs, what the development needs might be, as well as what the strengths are. So if you're able to highlight, that perhaps something is a weaker area for you, but when you sort of ask those questions in interview, if you sort of highlight, we probably might have spotted that, but actually it gives you extra points if you've highlighted that already, and can see that that's an area that you need to work on.
Yeah, indeed, it's really important. Okay, Debbie. Oh, Debbie, you're on mute, sorry.
Sorry. Yeah, just echoing what the other ladies have said. One thing we've done for a long time is when people come in, we give them a copy of the questions, so that they can kind of look down and refer to it rather than trying to hold everything. It's not an auditory memory task. We are wanting people to be able to kind of reflect on the question and answer as well as they can. And we have in the past had requests to send questions out to people, and we will do that. We would do it for everybody in that case, then it's fair across the board. So that would be something we would consider. And the other thing we would say is we will ask clinical questions, and we will do a little written exercise similar to already described, but think about wider questions. Think about safeguarding. I think somebody mentioned a safeguarding question earlier. Challenges with working within certain communities, but also things around your time management, your resilience, work-life balance, how you look after yourself. There'll be potentially wider questions, not all specifically clinical. So think about that. And the other thing I would say is, if you know lots of people who've already been to interviews, ask them what they were asked. Have a bank of questions that some of your friends and colleagues have been asked already, and then you'll see themes potentially coming through. Obviously with children's services, it'll be one set of questions. It might be quite different for adult services. So that would be an idea as well.
Great, thank you. And Alison.
Yeah, I think all very good tips from my colleagues there. I think we try to send some questions out in advance as well as the prepared task, but this isn't standard and not every trust will do that. But hopefully some opportunity to prepare on topic areas is useful, and you can pick that out from the person specification as well. I think my final tip really would be to prepare what you will do if you can't answer a question in the moment, because there may be a question that we phrase that you can't quite pick apart, or that you just don't have experience in. And I think if you're prepared in how you would respond to that, you're showing us that you know what to do, you know how to reflect, you know how to seek help, because not knowing everything is going to be, we don't expect you to know everything, but what we would like you to show is that you know what to do if you don't know something. I would refer to policies, I'd ask my peers, I would do an evidence-based search, I would do my research. So all the things that you would do if you were seeing a client that you didn't know much about the clinical background or the particular presentation, think about how you're going to answer a question in the moment that maybe panics you on the spot. So if you can prepare for that, you'll still have a good answer to it. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what's coming out across all of these 4 answers is really preparation, isn't it? Getting yourself prepared for the questions and doing your homework well beforehand is so key. Okay, I'm going to move on to question number 3 now, which is, when you're interviewing as a manager, what core skills and soft skills are you looking for? And I'm going to go to Anna first of all.
Okay, so core skills, we've mentioned before, but relevant clinical knowledge to the client group. So thinking about who you could be working for. If you're coming in for like an adult community job, stroke, Parkinson's, those are often common patient groups that you're going to be working with. So having a think about sort of the assessments, evidence-based, that sort of thing for the clients that you're going to be seeing. And in terms of soft skills, I think we pride ourselves on having a very friendly team where we work. And part of that is the fact that all of my team members have got great consideration and empathy, not just for their clients, but also for their other colleagues as well. Life can be tricky sometimes, and we all need somebody to have our back, I think, sometimes. So showing that sort of team, that real sort of desire to work in a team and support each other is something that we really look for at interview.
Great, thank you. Debbie, same question.
I've unmuted this time. That was a good start.
No, yeah.
Just again, an ability to demonstrate kind of that understanding of wider organisation requirements. So when you've been on placement, picking up, record keeping, confidentiality, policies and processes. It helps if you can show that you've kind of got an awareness. You don't have to have in-depth knowledge, because everyone will have a slightly different process and policy. But certainly the key things around things like record keeping and confidentiality are really important. And we've already touched on the recognising gaps in knowledge and what you need to develop. So being really open about that. On my placements, I didn't get to see very much of, but I have read around it, or I would like to do more of, or I would like some extra training in that area, is absolutely fine to say. And in a children's service, we would want you to be thinking about your speech disorders, developmental language disorder, your children on the neurodevelopmental assessment pathways, and how we might work with those young people, children with learning difficulties, stammering. Really kind of make sure that you've kind of looked back at your notes and done a bit of revision on those kind of topics, because those would be the core things we're likely to be asking about clinically.
Right, thank you. Alison?
Yeah, really agree with that. An in-depth knowledge of the clinical aspects of the role that you have applied for is really important. As far as soft skills go, trying to show in the interview that you're an excellent communicator, that you can build a rapport, some creative thinking, ability to adapt, and that will come across in your answers. Emotional intelligence and reflective skills are really important. Being self-aware shines through in interviews, and showing us your personality. I know interviews are intimidating, but smiling, being engaging, really listening, active listening, and trying to get to know your interviewers as well. See if you can get to know us a little bit during that process.
Brilliant, thank you. And Sophie?
So just keep really echoing what's already been said, to be honest. But from my perspective, I can teach clinical skills. I can teach you about autism, ADHD, speech sounds, DLD. We can teach all of that. What we can't teach sometimes is some of those soft skills. So that's what we want to see. We want to know, okay, you are compassionate, self-motivated, self-aware, you can work well as part of a team, you're flexible, you're nurturing, you care. And that's sometimes really going to need to come through, particularly in competitive jobs. So if we're seeing a lot of applicants, you may be absolutely all of those things, but unless we're kind of able to see that, or you're able to maybe describe that of times where you've done that, you've experienced that, both sometimes in your personal life and in your professional life, that then kind of sticks with me. Definitely examples. I always stick examples to faces, and I'm like, oh yeah, that was the applicant who said that or shared that. And it's about kind of being memorable. The best way to do it is by making a connection with the person who's interviewing you. That can be scary, I know. But like I say, sharing some of your own experiences and how you demonstrate some of those soft skills is really important. Also, having a really kind of good understanding of the client groups. I'm not necessarily with NQPs looking for them to understand everything, but I'd ideally like for somebody to understand the different kind of pathways that children may be on and client groups we're working with.
Okay, great, thank you. The next question is a bit turned on its head, really. So we've talked about the questions that you as managers would be potentially asking in interviews. My question is now, what questions can or should candidates ask the interviewers? So what questions can or should the candidates ask you as a manager at an interview? And I'm going to go to Alison first.
Thank you. I think it was Grace who said this in her presentation, that you should consider it's a two-way interview, and that the applicant is interviewing us as much as we are interviewing you. And that is exactly how I view an interview. So if you're applying and you are in the situation of the interviewee, think about, is this a team you want to work with? And what question can you ask that will help you to decide, is this the team for me? Do we align with your own personal values? Do you see that you're going to be a good fit? I always remember a question that I was asked that really stuck in my mind, and that was, what do you like most about your work? So the interviewee asked me what I loved about working in the job I was doing and the team I was in. And I thought that was a really lovely question. You could ask about the departmental objectives, the organisational values, because you're trying to work out whether you can be a part of that organisation and that team. I'd say there are always going to be policies, particularly in NHS jobs, around flexible working and annual leave. So really, you shouldn't need to ask those questions at interview, because we are guided by those policies. And I would suggest you could wait to ask those questions for when you're offered the role, and focus in the interview on what's going to help you make the decision as to whether, yes, this is the team I'd like to work in.
Brilliant, thank you. Anna, same question.
Yeah, so perhaps I think a couple of the NQPs had mentioned this in terms of knowing how, how they can cope with sort of the week and what's expected of them in the job. So I would sort of ask, what does a typical week look like for an NQP, so that you have an idea of kind of where you're going to be working, amount of travel involved, how often you might be working on your own, when you might get to go and be with colleagues. Because if you know you're somebody who needs to be working in the same place every day and have regular contact, then our job might not be for you. But if you're somebody who is quite happy sort of with a bit of lone working and quite organized and doesn't mind a bit of travel around our patch, then we might be the right fit for you. So sort of thinking about those things in advance before you're making those decisions. Also, contacting us in advance, I see that really positively. So my email's always on the job advert, dropping a line and perhaps scheduling in a call. We like to sort of put a voice to the name that'll be coming through to interview. And even actually, I would say, if you live in a certain area, so certainly up in Yorkshire, perhaps it's a little bit harder sometimes for us with recruitment. If you know you're going to be looking for a job in a certain area, there's no harm in perhaps dropping a line to the manager just to let you know that you're interested. Of a job if it comes up, because I'm having to make an awful lot of decisions in my head about budgets, how I'm spending my money, which posts I'm going to be putting out. So knowing that there might be somebody local who's really interested in a job coming up is really helpful to know.
Thank you. Certainly from my perspective, I really like to have had a chat with someone before they even think about applying for the role. I think it's really important to lift the phone and speak to the recruitment manager and just find out a bit more. I always find it quite strange that people just apply for a role and just turn up without ever finding out a bit more from the manager of that service. So I think that's one of my top tips really, is please lift the phone and do speak to the manager who's looking for a new post. I'm going to Sophie next.
So I'd really encourage candidates to ask about the role that is currently up, because it's going to be really important for you as therapists to know, is this the right one for me? It can feel really pressurized to come out of university and to think, oh gosh, I've got to get a job. But I think one of the most important things is to not take a job that is going to impact you negatively, both in your career or personally. That team has to work for you just as much as you work for them. And I place a lot of value on that. I look after my SLTs. I want them to enjoy their job. I want them to love coming to work. I want them to love being a speech therapist as much as I am. But our kind of goals have to align. So we have to have shared views on things. So find out about mine, find out about how I became a speech therapist. I'm still a relatively, I would say, new-ish speech therapist for having a company. So ask your own manager, okay, well, what do you like being about a speech therapist? Why did you become a speech therapist? And then also, what's it like to work in that company? What would somebody or what would another therapist say about working for you? I think it's always good as well to ask about career progression. But sometimes I think be aware that if all of your questions relate to basically how quick can I get to a band 6, do I want to get and do my dysphagia competencies, that is going to sometimes highlight, okay, is this person going to stay with us for a while, or do they just want to have access to, okay, what does a private therapy company look like? Can I go and learn how to do that? And then just move on quickly. So just be mindful sometimes of how you pose questions, but definitely still ask all of those things. Just be aware of how they come across.
Brilliant, thank you. And finally, for this question, Debbie.
Yeah, everybody said most of it, but asking about training opportunities, I think is always a valid one. You know, in the past, there's been times when our training budgets have been really tight. I think that might be happening again, but you know, I think it's a valid question to ask. You know, do you get to go on external courses? Are there internal training opportunities, etc.? I think that's a very valid one. And supervision, you know, again, what kind of supervision do you get? Obviously, you do you know, prescribe supervision as a newly qualified therapist, but you don't then just want to fall off a cliff and be left on your own somewhere. It's, you know, what does that department supervision look like for the whole team, and how would you fit into that? I think is another valid question to ask, to reassure you that you will still have that supervision in place even once your competencies are complete and you're getting quite experienced. We all still need some kind of supervision. I still get it 35 years on, and I still learn from it. So it's definitely something to ask about.
Great, thank you. Thank you so much for those answers. Okay, I'm moving on to quite a different question now, which is when and how disabled and neurodiverse students, or NQPs, should request or support or reasonable adjustments, not only at work, but when interviewing. So it's quite a long question. I'll just read it out again. When and how disabled and neurodiverse students stroke NQPs should request support or reasonable adjustments, not only at work, but when interviewing. I'm going to go to Sophie first. Sophie.
So as a speech therapist with ADHD myself, I know how anxiety inducing it can be sometimes to share that diagnosis. But I would really, really encourage you to do so if you feel comfortable in doing that, because what that allows us to do is understand, okay, well, this person may be autistic. Let me understand how that affects you. And that conversation may occur in one of those pre-meetings that I have before interview. And I always ask, are there any adaptations that someone may need? Like I said before, I want to get the best from somebody. If last minute changes or being put on the spot causes high levels of anxiety, then absolutely I'm not going to do that or put somebody in a position where they feel that way. You may be an absolutely incredible speech therapist, but you just need lots of highly structured routines in place to absolutely achieve that. But I want to know that, because I want to know that when and if you come and work for me, that I am supporting you in the best way that I can. Myself, I understand fully about what it's like to be disorganized, a really strong desire for routines, a relatively significant sensory profile, and all of the things that it's taken for me to be able to do my job in the way that I do it. And I couldn't do it without the adaptations that I have in place for myself. So I always make sure that anybody that's working for us also has access to all of those things too, because whether you're neurodivergent or not, that's you. And usually a neurodivergent brain has so many strengths that comes with it that I also want to kind of utilize and celebrate that, because that is the kind of core anchoring of our company too, and our values. So I would say ask for any adaptations. If you feel comfortable in doing so, share a diagnosis or things that you find difficult, because you're going to get the best out of your interview, that process, as well as the person who's interviewing you as well.
Great, thank you. Thanks for that, Sophie. Anna.
Yeah, so I think we do take a positive response, especially where I guess it's been declared at interview, and we can put the adjustments in place, because it kind of shows that you've got insight into what you find challenging, and that you're actually proactive in sort of highlighting what support you need. Our organisation has quite a strong focus on equality and diversity and inclusion, and I guess the adjustments have to be reasonable and workable within the job description. So and that is something to consider, because there is still, you know, a job description that we, you know, a job that needs to be done. But we will be absolutely supportive in looking at ways around. And it's a lot easier for us as managers if you've got a problem with organisation coming and saying, I find it really difficult to organise myself and time management, than us having to come the other way around because there's been concerns raised and you're not managing in the role. It's a lot easier for my colleagues who are supporting you as well. It makes the conversations a lot easier, and it shows that you're identifying where you need to develop or need support, which is always a good thing.
Brilliant, thank you. Debbie?
Yeah, same as the other ladies have said. I think it's really important that you tell us as soon as you can about any adaptations or any needs, particularly for the interview, but obviously then going on into work with us if you were to get a job with us. We do have a number of staff on reasonable adjustments. Again, that word reasonable means it does have to still meet the needs of the service, but there's lots of things we can do in terms of working environments and working patterns and hours of work and additional equipment, etc. So, you know, we've got policies to support all of that in terms of our HR support. One thing that's a fairly new thing is we look at wellbeing at work action plans. So again, if somebody's struggling, we can do a wellbeing at work action plan where it's like written down exactly what you need, what support you need, etc. And it's kind of a kind of recognised document that then we all work towards. So that's specific to us, perhaps in Bridgewater at the moment, but most places will have something similar in place from an HR perspective. So don't be frightened of talking about your needs, and then we can actually meet those and make sure we get the best from you as a therapist and you enjoy your work.
Thank you. And finally on this one, Alison.
Yeah, thank you. I think what Sophie said is, if you feel able to say it as soon as possible, it enables us to work together to make your career a success from the outset. We want you to love being a speech therapist and to stay in the profession. And I think we're very aware of burnout and fallout and people leaving the profession. So we've got to get it right from the start. And we can only do that if we work together. I'm always thinking that although as much as I want you to stay in my team in Buckinghamshire, I'm also preparing you potentially for your next role in the NHS in another team or in a private company like Sophie's. And so we want you to love being a speech therapist and enjoy your career. So tell us everything you can so that we can help you. I'd also just say that as recruiters, we're continually learning as well. So if you don't give us feedback and tell us what you need, we don't adapt our interview processes perhaps as much as we should. And so some changes we've made recently, because we've had feedback from our interview candidates, is that we do send out at least half of the interview questions in advance for preparation. We do give them in a written format when you arrive, so you can like refresh your memory while you're sitting waiting for your interview. And we wouldn't necessarily have made those changes if we hadn't heard from you about what makes the interview process better. So yeah, share as much as you can.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thank you for that. As a lot of you will know, at the RCSLT, we have CEN, CENS, which are the Clinical Excellence Networks. And we've just, over the past 12 months, done quite a detailed root and branch review of our CENs and of our hubs. And it's about encouraging everybody to get involved in a CEN, to, even though you may not be working in a specific clinical area, but you have an interest in a CEN, then it's really important for you to join that CEN and network with people who are also working in that or thinking about working in those areas. So it's really important for us to encourage everyone on this call, if you're not a member of the CEN, to think about joining it. And you get more information on our website about that. But I just wondered from our panel, if you're aware of how these or any other networks have helped students in the past, and maybe just tell us about that. I think Alison?
Yeah, thank you. It's written in all our job descriptions in our trust that you should be a member of a clinical excellence network relevant to your area of interest, because it is such a useful network, and you can get so much up-to-date research and evidence base. But the networking opportunities, you know, are second to none. To sit in a room full of people who work in the same clinical area as you and absorb their thoughts and share your own. So I would encourage everyone to become a student member of a CEN if you feel you already know what direction of travel you want to take your career, and attend as a student member. And I would also just say that the distribution lists for these clinical excellence networks will often share jobs in that field that have been circulated. So you may hear about roles and opportunities that you can apply for through being a member of a CEN.
Brilliant, thank you. Debs?
Yeah, so just same as already said, we do encourage all our therapists to be part of CENs. In-house though, we do actually have some protected learning time, so we have set time aside so we can share kind of learning, do evidence-based practice work. So there's, even within the team, we're quite a big team, there's 36 of us, so we don't all get to see each other all the time, so these are nice opportunities to come together and choose a topic and talk about that and share ideas and things. So it doesn't always have to go out. If you can't get to a CEN, you know, hopefully you'll be able to get opportunities within the service that you're working in as well.
Brilliant, thank you, Debbie. And also, just to mention that we have a CEN networking room at the end of this event, so stay on with us and join that. I know that Alison Ramsey, one of our staff members who's done most of the work over the past year on CENs, will be in that networking room and be able to answer more questions for you. So please join that later on. Okay, I'm going to move on to my next question is, what do you expect from an NQP day to day whilst they're in post? And I'm going to go to Anna first of all.
Yeah, so I think one of the key things that we're looking for is that it's this move now. You're now a practitioner, and we're looking for you to demonstrate that ability to take responsibility for your development and your learning. Obviously, we're there to support, but you know, if there are issues we need, you know, if you're having areas that need support with, you need to highlight that and to let us know, you know, where you're having difficulties as well as what your strengths are. But I think that's really important. It's you know, those NQP competencies, you're proactively leading on that and your development, sort of taking that responsibility on.
Great, thank you. Sophie?
So I think that sometimes NQPs can get flustered and overwhelmed with trying to know everything and worrying that they don't. So I would get to know the basics, and that's going to be specific to whichever job role that you're doing, but get to know the basics. For example, get to know the key assessments, get to know key kind of therapies, ask questions, ask to shadow other therapists to see how they deliver a session. Some of the best ways in which I deliver my assessments, or if I'm doing an ADOS, has come from observing other clinicians deliver those. And I'm like, right, I'll steal that from you. Loved that way you did that. So you're going to learn so much from observing, but you're going to need to have the basics also. no question is a silly question. I would much rather somebody to ask me about something than be unsure. We create really open lines of communication. Sometimes sending an email can feel really, really formal, especially when you're asking a question that you might feel a little bit silly about asking. But I don't expect a newly qualified therapist to know everything. I also don't expect them to remember their entire degree. You may have done an adult placement in your last year, but want to be a paediatric therapist. And absolutely, that has to be considered. So I usually set really short-term goals with therapists of, okay, what do you need? What do you want? But I also then expect that therapist to give as much as we do as a company. You also have to put in the work to do those things.
Great, thank you. And then we're going to Alison.
Yeah, I'm not going to say too much about what I would expect kind of on a day-to-day basis. I think the NQPs earlier described what they do on a day-to-day basis so beautifully. But what I would emphasize is that try to get your work-life balance right from the very start. I would not want to think of anyone in my team, but particularly my newly qualifieds, going home at 4:30, 5 o'clock when their working day ends, getting home and then logging back on and preparing for the next day, reading, working out what assessments they're going to do. I want you to go home, do some sport, take part in your social activities, do a club, watch something on the telly, whatever it is that you do to unwind, have a good night's rest and come back in recharged and ready to go the next day. And if we're not getting that right, you need to tell us. So you need to give us an idea of how much you need to be busy and challenged, but not overwhelmed. And I think it's a fine balance between getting that right. And we have to acknowledge that we don't always. So you've got to have clear communication with us and let us know if it's not quite right.
Thank you. Yeah, it's so important to get that work-life balance right. And we often talk about it, but actually putting it into practice sometimes is not as easy. So it's really important to talk and plan ahead. So thank you all for that. I think we've just probably got one or two more questions left. And the next one's, what support should NQPs expect from their supervisors? That's an interesting one. So what support should NQPs expect from their supervisor? And I'm going to go to Sophie first of all.
So as an NQP, you should feel safe. It is our responsibility. You are a brand new therapist at this point. We are not expecting you to be able to do everything, and you should feel safe and comfortable with your supervisor. That person should be somebody who you can ask those questions to without feeling silly, who you can share any difficulties or concerns with. If you can't do that, that then becomes an unsafe environment, both for the company or the trust and you as a therapist, because if you're unable to ask for help, that means you're putting yourself as well as clients at risk. So you have to feel that, and that has to be two ways. We set long and short-term goals. So with my entire team, I get them to set a long-term goal of what they'd like to achieve, and then we put short-term plans in place to help them achieve that. So, for example, if one of my therapists wanted to come and join us on our autism assessment team, I would put in training, so that may be ADOS or ADI training, as well as some more short-term goals of shadowing assessments, beginning to lead on parts of assessments. So then very regularly, you're able to see, I'm working towards that goal that I set. You're succeeding as a speech therapist, and you're also growing and developing in your career. We also look at any barriers that are in place. So if we've put those short-term goals in place, but we're not meeting them, why is that? Is it something that's happening in your personal life that means that you're not quite in a position to be able to engage in that? Or is it something that's happening at work? Is it that your timetable means that it doesn't align with our autism assessment service for you to be able to get out? But highlight those things, because as a manager, you're usually spinning 100 different plates and we're not always aware of all of the barriers that may be in place. So share that in regular supervision.
Great, thank you. Anna, same question.
Took a while to unmute. So we provide regular supervision to our NQP. So it usually starts with weekly supervision and sort of drops down as the therapist sort of is able, usually sort of fortnightly within your first 6 months. We follow sort of a subset of some of the NQP competencies, and we also have a probation sort of period as well. But your supervision will be sort of well structured as well, with sort of checks in on your well-being, your diary, your caseload, your development objectives, and we often try and set up. We usually have a peer or a buddy set up as well, and people do often find there's lots of people in the team that they can ask for support. So yeah, and we make sure that all staff have a 3-week induction into the service, so you get to meet all of the team in all the different areas as well, so you feel like you'd know who to contact if you've got questions about different areas.
That's great, thank you. Alison?
Yeah, thanks. I think the structure's been really well described by Sophie and Anna, and I suppose it's your expectation should be that you have a good relationship with your supervisor, one of mutual respect, so that you know that you can go into that safe space and have constructive conversations, and bearing in mind that your supervisor will also be learning from you, because you are fresh with all the evidence and all the knowledge from university. And I frequently sit in supervision sessions and think, oh, I could go and look that up, or oh, that's great, I hadn't thought of trying that myself. So that kind of relationship of mutual curiosity and supportiveness, and taking every opportunity for formal and informal. You know, we have lots of conversations that go on in the office, which you can learn from, as well as your structured formal supervision sessions, where you can take your competency frameworks and tick the boxes of what you're achieving as well.
Thank you. And finally for this one, Debbie.
Yeah, just same as the other ladies have said, but after your 3-week induction's done, and maybe even 6 months or 12 months down the line, shadowing, joint sessions, those would definitely be something that you could ask for or discuss. You know, get somebody to watch you, you go and watch them. There's still so much learning to be done in that kind of way as well, not just the discussions of cases and things, but actually watching people at work and getting them to watch you, I think, is still a really valuable thing to do. And I mean, that really should happen all through your working life, because we can all still learn things. So that is another way of looking at supervision as well.
Great, thank you so much. And also just to mention, I guess, that if NQPs feel that they aren't getting the right supervision, Royal College of Speech and Language Therapy can really help you with this. So you can get in contact with the inquiries team, who will give you advice and guidance on that. Or we have an education team here as well, who will be a learning and education team who'll be able to help you with some of that. So please use the RCSLT if you're struggling, or if you need any help or guidance around supervision. We're here to help you. Okay, I'm moving on to my last question, which is an interesting one, which is, what's been your experience as a manager of working as part of an MDT or a multidisciplinary team? And what have you learned, both positive and negative? So that's an interesting one. What's your learning from both positive and negative of being part of an MDT? And I'm going to go to Alison first of all.
Yeah, we had some brilliant examples of MDTs from the newly qualified therapists there as well. It's almost like they set this question up for us. It was perfect. I think, you know, remember that the MDT is a huge number of people, but it's the patient at the middle of it, and the patient is part of that MDT, and everyone who works in that MDT should be working with the client, their family, their carers. So we've got our MDT colleagues in the therapies, in the medical world, in the education world, but also those in third sector organisations. So if our clients are fed in with charities, so I'll give an example in the stroke world. The Stroke Association delivers so much holistic, longer term supports, and they become part of that MDT for that individual as well. So I think for me, working in MDT, it just helps you understand the broad provision of care that is available for the individuals we're supporting. And we all learn from each other in how we can achieve the best holistic care for the person right at the centre of that MDT, the patient. And of course, there are challenges. They might be competing priorities, differing opinions, different amounts of time and resource that the members of the MDT have. But I think you can always kind of overcome those challenges by keeping the patient at the centre of our teamwork. And by doing that, you can usually balance out some of those negatives or those perceived negatives.
Brilliant. Thank you, Alison. I'm going to Sophie next.
So I absolutely wouldn't have the skills that I do today if it wasn't for being part of MDTs. I was a very eager therapist and shadowed lots of different people within those MDTs to understand their roles. I did have a different role as a speech therapist kind of from very early on, but understanding what the paediatrician did, I was referring very regularly to the paediatrician, understanding, okay, what actually happens when a child gets referred to you, then enabled me to explain that to parents when they were coming to me, or children who were coming through our nurseries or through our school provision. It allowed me to see, oh, okay, I know that this is what that service offers. The same for OT and physio. I was able to really easily see, okay, that is exactly what your role is, because for a long time I didn't really know what an OT did. I saw their name all the time, but I wasn't exactly sure what they did. So actually spending some time with them and understanding that was incredibly helpful to me in my early career. MDTs are great places to discuss clinical cases, but opinions are always going to differ. You are going to come up against the medical model versus the social model, and sometimes that can be really, really hard to listen to at times. Because you're hearing somebody possibly talk about an autistic child from a very medical perspective. In that, my internal monologue is to challenge and to be like, hang on a minute, what's that about? But I then just share my experience and the way in which I'm working with that client. And you learn ways to do that. It can feel anxiety inducing, particularly when you're first in MDT and you're sat in a room full of maybe 8 people, and then it comes to you to talk about your clinical case. But what I would do is hear and listen to those alternative thoughts, because that is how you will learn differential diagnosis. When I started to learn more about neurodevelopmental conditions, I really started to understand, okay, well, that's a psychologist's perspective of this, and this is an OT's perspective, or this is a psychiatrist's perspective of this. So then when now I'm going into clinical cases, all of those things I am now considering of, oh, okay, actually, there's been trauma in this history. So I know that I need to look out for X, Y, and Z for my clinical decision making. So MDTs are a really, really effective way to, one, meet other professionals, but to two, develop your clinical reasoning.
Thank you, Sophie. Yeah, and sometimes you need lots of patience, don't you, in MDTs. Anna.
So I've worked sort of within stroke MDTs and mental health MDTs. So I worked in stroke MDTs for nearly sort of 20 years, and I learned so much about wider patient care, medical care, and leadership, which has sort of really helped me in my development and my roles, and sort of working as sort of the sole SLT in a stroke team. From a negative point of view, what I did often find that I carried a much larger caseload than some of the other therapists in the team was being, they may have a therapist in a unit. I might be covering 3 units and a community caseload. So I did find myself pulled, I think, in multiple directions with different people's priorities. So I think learning to kind of understand people's points of view and their priorities, and taking a bit of a curiosity to differences of opinion is helpful, but also developing some strategies and setting boundaries was useful as well for managing my work-life balance and my workload.
Thank you, Anna. And finally, Deb.
Yeah, it's mostly been said already, but certainly from a children's perspective, is we tend to think of MDTs as people sitting around a room talking about a child and family, but actually we're out there working with teachers and teaching assistants and specialist nurses and OTs and physios, and that really does help us see that kind of whole child and family. If we can work collaboratively, we're going to get much better outcomes, working alongside the teaching staff and really understanding where they're at educationally, as well as with their communication skills, and what the challenges are for those children in school on a day-to-day basis is so important. So so that's really from a children's perspective. Negatives, yeah, there are negatives. It can be really quite challenging when you feel like you're other professional colleagues, either in education or healthcare, aren't quite seeing it the same way as you. So it's that diplomacy. And I think at the end of the day, it's how you explain the impact of their communication skills. So you might have a teacher telling you about the child's behaviour in class, and as soon as you can get over that communication aspect of the behaviour is a communication, it's part of the problem, and we need to communicate differently, or we need to accept their communication in a different way, and the penny drops, and you see the kind of and then everything improves for that young person. So then if you can do that, you've done such an amazing job, and hopefully that person will take that forward for the next child they meet with similar problems. But as everyone else has said, we also learn so much. I can't tell you how many annual reviews I've been to where the parent hasn't engaged with me for ages and ages, but I managed to get to the annual review, and you hear about all this stuff that's going on in the background for this child and family. And then you go, oh, no wonder they've not been coming to clinic, or no wonder they haven't been doing the practice at home. And then suddenly, again, you can think, right, I'll have to approach this in a completely different way. How can I rejig things? How can I approach this in a way that will support the family and get the job done? It's not just the way I was originally planning it. So the MDT is everybody that's around that child and family. And like you say, they're at the heart of everything we should do. And we're their advocates. Sometimes we are the ones that are the one in the but when we're in a meeting, yes, but and it's having the confidence to do that, but in a diplomatic way.
Indeed. Debbie, thank you so much for that. I just want to say a really big thank you to all of the managers for sharing your experience and expertise with us all today. It's been really helpful. I'm sure that all the NQPs and students who've been on the call will have learned so much. So thank you both. Thank you all so much. And obviously you're going to stay around for some questions at the end of the session as well. I'm going to move on now to introduce Tom. Tom, I believe you're there. Tom Griffin's the Professional Inquiries Manager at the Royal College of Speech and Language Therapy. And Tom, good to see you. And
hi,
over to you.
Thanks very much, Steve. Thanks. So yeah, hi everyone. My name's Tom Griffin. As Steve said, I'm the Professional Inquiries Manager here at the Royal College of Speech and Language Therapists. And I'm here just to give you a really quick, probably a refresh soundbite of who the HCPC are, and just a bit of information about what you need to know, what things would be really useful for you to understand, and help you through the registration process, basically. So Health and Care Professions Council, who are they? So the HCPC are a multi-professional health and care regulator who regulate 15 professions in the UK, including speech and language therapy, physios, OTs, etc. Their main role is to protect the public and maintain confidence in the professions they regulate. And they do this by setting standards that all professionals that they regulate must meet in order to maintain their registration. They'll only register people that have demonstrated they're able to meet these standards and can practice safely and effectively. The HCPC also approve training programs for all of the 15 professions, and they do this by checking and monitoring the quality of these training courses to ensure that they are meeting their standards. They also make sure, really importantly, that someone who is trained outside of the UK and wanting to come and register with the HCPC are able to meet similar standards before gaining that registration. They'll also take action if anyone on the register is not meeting these standards, or if a concern is raised about an individual through their fitness to practice process. Okay, next slide, please. So the standards of that the HCPC set, they set a number of different standards, but I thought I'd focus on the two main ones that will be really pertinent to you guys at the moment. So the first standard is the standards of proficiency. So the standards of proficiency are profession specific, and they aim to set out the basic standards that all speech therapists must meet in order to practice. They set expectations for speech and language therapists' knowledge and abilities when practicing speech and language therapy in the UK. Next slide, please. The second one that I'm going to focus on is the standards of conduct, performance, and ethics. Now, these differ slightly from the standards of proficiency, as these relate to all registrants of the speech and language of HCPC, regardless of profession. And they aim to set out how the HCPC expects all of their registrants to behave. They provide an outline of expectations that members of the public can reasonably have when being treated by a professional. And because of this, they're used as a major part of the fitness to practice process when a concern is raised about a registrant. Okay, next slide, please. So just to go through it'll be useful to go through the registration process a little bit, as you'll be coming to that soon. So as a regulator, it's a legal responsibility to be registered with the HCPC before commencing work as a speech and language therapist. If you don't have HCPC registration, you will not be able to work as a speech and language therapist until this is organised, and this can affect job offers and start dates, etc. So the process itself, the HCPC are provided the university pass lists as soon as they come out, which means that you can apply to register with the HCPC as soon as you're told that you have passed. Some people get quite confused with this and think they must wait until after their graduation process, etc. That's not the case. You can start the process off early. The process should take around about 10 days to complete, but this can obviously be much longer at busier times. So you just need to be aware of that. And once you've been informed that your application has been approved, you'll then be asked to pay the registration fees, which again, depending on your bank processing speeds, can take 3 to 4 days to go through. So you'll need to factor all of this in when thinking about when that registration will come through fully. All in all, the process should take around about 2 weeks. But again, it can be much longer in busier periods, so do be aware of that. Once registered, you'll be expected as a full speech and language therapist on the HCPC register to re-register every 2 years. Now, the dates for this are the same for all speech and language therapists, regardless of when you joined. And at this point, it's when the HCPC conduct their audit of CPD. The good news, though, is as new graduates, you won't be chosen for an audit on your first re-registration period, which is a real bonus for you guys. And the next re-registration period is between June and September next year. Next slide, please. So while HCPC registration is required to work as a speech therapist, it's still possible to work as a speech therapy assistant or support worker whilst you're awaiting your registration. However, you will need to ensure that it is clear that you aren't doing anything that would fall within the remit of a qualified speech therapist in this period. And it is obviously down to the employer's discretion as to whether they can accommodate that at the time. There's also no requirement for you to register straight away with the HCPC. It may be that you want to go traveling or you want to continue your studies after graduation, and that is absolutely fine. But you do need to keep in mind that you have a maximum of 2 years after graduation in which to register with the HCPC. Any longer than 2 years, and you may be required to complete a period of return to work evidencing before the HCPC will register you. And this can take up to a year to complete, and you won't be able to work as a speech therapist in that period. So it's worth being aware of that. However, there may be some exceptions to this. For example, if you've been traveling and you've worked as a speech therapist outside of the UK, or if you've worked in a role that the HCPC deem uses the same knowledge and skills in this period, they may not require you to complete a period of return to practice. What I would always suggest is if you're thinking about an alternative route or deferring your registration with the HCPC, do contact us here at the RCSLT and we can discuss your individual situation and give you advice on next steps and what's best to do. Okay, next slide, thanks. Sorry, yeah, that's it. So just a real recap, it's been a bit of a whirlwind tour of the HCPC. So it's a legal requirement to be registered with the HCPC in order to work as a speech therapist in the UK. But it is possible to work as a speech therapy assistant or support worker whilst waiting for your HCPC registration. And there is no requirement for you to register straight after graduating. But do keep in mind that there is that 2-year time frame in which this should be done. Otherwise, there may be a requirement for some return to work evidence in order to register. Okay, so hopefully that was useful. It's just a real quick recap of the HCPC, what they're there for, etc. You move on to the next slide. So here's a few useful links that might be helpful for you to access and have a look at. The HCPC have some great information around what they're there for and how they work. So do take a look. And as Steve said before, at any point, if you have any questions about anything that's gone on throughout the day, please do get in contact with my team at the RCSLT. We're here to help support you. There is no silly questions. So please do get in contact with us and we'll be happy to help in any way we can. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Tom. Really helpful. And as you say, RCSLT are here to help everyone. So Tom and his team have got most of the answers, I think, for these questions.
We can try.
We can try. But please, any questions at all? And as Tom said, no question is a silly question. So please, please contact Tom and his team. That would be great. Thank you. Okay, I'm going to move on now to Vicky Harris. I believe Vicky is here.
I am
Hi,
here.
Vicky.
Thank you, Steve. Hi. Hi, everyone.
Hi, Vicky.
Hi. I hope you're having a lovely morning. You'll be pleased to know that I'm just before break, so not too much longer now. Yes, I was just, if we could have the next slide, please. Thank you very much. Just a very quick sort of parish notice, if you like. So you have been learning today about the newly qualified practitioner process. I wanted to say a bit about that and the fact that it is changing, but it's not going to change in your period when you're doing it, but it will be changing in the future, and we really would value your help in looking at it, please. And to start by saying that although we are evolving the process, it's very important to know that as part of the work that we've been doing to evolve it, we've heard from people who say that the process itself is a really valuable one. So the process that you will be going through is very valued, and people really like it as a way to the stepping stone from university to your sort of fully practicing career. And in all of the work we've been doing recently, we don't think we've found another professional body that has an NQP process quite like the RCSLT one, if at all. So to know that you already have that process and it's well regarded. But we want your help to make it even better, so that the next generation comes through and it's it evolves over time. So we're really looking for your help with a consultation. We are just putting out a proposal for an updated version of the newly qualified practitioner process, and we'd like your help with the consultation, please. So if you have any time to have a look at that QR code and read through what our members are proposing might change in future and give your comments, we'd be really, really grateful. And to say that, you may hear there's a lot today, but it really does look good to your future employers if you've been involved in your professional body or with the profession in any way. So, you can put this one down on your CV or mention it in an interview that I was involved in a consultation, and I'm sure there'll be others you can join as well. That's really it from me, and very happy to have any questions or get in touch with me after this. Thanks.
Brilliant. Thank you, Vicky. And just to say, you're not William Christopher has come up on your screen.
I am not. I'm sneaking in as him, though.
Yeah, but Vicky's head of learning here, RCSLT. So again, any questions that you have for Vicky, just drop her an email. I'm sure she'd be happy to respond. Okay, we're going to have it's 5 to 12. So let's come back at 12:05. We'll have 10 minutes break. Where we go into the Q&A session. Can I please ask you again to log on to the QR code and scan any questions, and please also think about upvoting questions as well. So if you see a question that you really want to make sure you vote that, so the higher up the list, the more chance it will be of being asked. So please do that as well. And if everybody can join me back at 12:05, that would be great. Thank you. Okay, welcome back, everybody. I hope you've had a chance to have a bit of a break, cup of tea or coffee, and ready for the last part of this session, which is the Q&A session. I'm just going to wait until my clock turns to 12:05, and then we will get started. Thank you so much to everybody for the amount of questions we have been sent. There are a large number, but I do hope that we will be able to get through as many as we possibly can within the next sort of 50 minutes. I'm just waiting for my screen to come up. All right, here we go. So the very first question is, if you're wanting to start a job as an NQP in August 2025, when is the most appropriate time to send in applications for the post on NHS jobs? Anybody like to answer that for me, please?
I don't know if this depends a bit on different organisations. We might start looking after Christmas, I think, really, but we do have to be in mind that if we're taking on somebody in the summer, it's going to be a long time to wait, I guess. So yeah, we will look after Christmas.
Great. Yeah, absolutely. Alison.
I think it's worth a phone call to the organisation before you put the application in to find out whether it is too early or not. Historically, some jobs are slightly more challenging to fill than others, and we would, accept applications really early. But if it's a job that's kind of time critical, then we may not encourage an application for a post that's 9 months away. So I think it's probably post specific.
Okay, lots of nods around the screen, so that's really helpful. Thank you for that. The next question, if you start out in one clinical area, for example, pediatrics, how easy is it to transfer to a different specialism, for example, adults post-stroke? So starting in peds, how easy is it to move to something else? Taslima.
Hi, so I just wanted to share, most of my placement experience was adult, so I didn't think I was going to get pediatric roles. So it is literally about discussing about how you can transfer your skills, how you understand the assessments. For example, with adults, a lot of my placement experiences were with stroke as well. So it's, for example, the VNest, how that might relate to colourful semantics, how similar they are in terms of forming sentences and, subject, verb, objects and stuff, and just demonstrating you understand how to apply it, transfer it. And I feel like that's what got me my pediatric role, which I was reluctant, thinking I'm not going to be able to secure it, but you can.
Okay, really helpful. Anna.
Yeah, so we've helped staff who've actually been working for quite a long time in paediatrics to come across to adults. But I guess it had to sort of understand they may have had to accept a lower grade. So starting at band 5, we often have band 5 to 6 roles. That sort of role might be quite appropriate if you've met various your NQPs and things and other skills in paediatrics and could therefore move sort of quickly in adults. So I think if it's something that you're interested in, you've already started your career, then sort of asking local organisations and let them know that you're interested.
Great. Thank you, everyone. The next one's, how independently are you expected to practice in your first few weeks on the job? Do you have any tips on transitioning from a student on placement to an NQP? A really important question. Hannah, you happy to answer this one?
So I think, especially from my experience, especially because I went from placement to working in my trust, I think certainly for me, the transition actually felt quite smooth, because for my first 6 weeks on the job, I was doubling up. I wasn't expected to work independently. I was doubling up with other people in my team. We were doing joint assessments. I was still very much learning from them. And, sometimes they'd say, oh, do you want to write up the notes for this one? And they were always checking my notes afterwards. So I do think the transition was actually quite smooth. I think there was definitely an aspect of me advocating for myself and saying to my supervisors, I think I'm ready to do this one by myself. And they'd still be sort of in the background able to support me. But I think it was definitely a case of me advocating for my own independence, because they're obviously very understanding that people will still require that support. But I think certainly for me, it felt like quite an easy transition. I'm sure experiences will vary, but that was mine.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. Sophie.
So I think it will depend on everybody individually. Some people may be more confident to feel like, okay, I feel like I understand, and I want to give that a go. And others may feel like they want to be a bit more protected in that. What I would say is set that out with your supervisor when you start. Have a look at what might work for you. You might decide, I'd like to give it this many weeks of me shadowing, and then possibly I'd like to do maybe one part, or can I do that assessment jointly with you? And again, like was just said previously, advocate if you'd like to. So sometimes supervisors aren't going to know that you are definitely ready and don't want to necessarily push you, but if you feel confident to do so, say, oh, I'd really like to do that part of the assessment, or I'd really like to do this, but also don't feel too much pressure in those early weeks to do so. But getting yourself slightly out of your comfort zone and into that, the sooner you do that, the more comfortable you'll feel. Because actually what's more anxiety inducing is your supervisor watching you do that assessment or watching you deliver that therapy. I know when I'm working with my team, even now, they'll say the most stressful part is that sometimes I'm there, or it might be that a head teacher's walked in and watched the session, even though they know what they're doing. So sometimes you get to grips with more of those things where you feel more relaxed. So don't feel that you have to stay in that highly protected place for too long.
That's really, yeah, it's reassuring, Sophie. Thank you. I think Alison next and then Jade.
Yeah, I agree with Sophie. Getting outside the comfort zone is important, and trying to challenge yourself to be independent. We tend to work off the C1, do one together, do one on your own, and explain one kind of principle. So many client presentations will be very similar, that you can get up and running quite quickly and be very independent with one particular client group while you add in layers of different client groups or different complexity of work. And I think your confidence grows much more from knowing that you've got that little bit that is autonomously yours, with that distance support and supervision as much as you need to, whilst you layer on other parts and get experience.
Great, thanks, Alison. And then Jade.
Yeah, so sorry about that. So I agree with Hannah as well. So going from my role, so I had a lot of the dysphagia, felt a lot more protected and we had that set program, but the communication was quite independent from the start, and I think what really helped me was kind of, even from placement, I'd set up crib sheets for me, so kind of having them there. It helps you to be a bit more kind of autonomous. You've got things to refer to. I think equally seeking that support, but also not being afraid to doing some self-directed learning, and kind of you learn a lot of them skills at uni. And I know we have that discussion a lot in our band 5 peer supervision as well, and getting tips from other people of how they've felt and taking it at your pace, and kind of regularly checking in kind of with what's expected of you, kind of what's that level of expectation, how does that meet with you, and yeah, just regularly checking in. I say everyone is I don't think there is necessarily a standard of how everyone kind of deals with that, but I think having techniques that work for you, taking techniques from other people as well.
Great, thanks, Jade. Really helpful. Thank you. I'm going to move on to the next question, which is, I'm worried I'm not at the uni. Sorry, I'm worried I'm not at uni and not on placements in the area I want to work. Any advice on networking with services in the area I want to work? So how do I network in the service that I want to work in? Hannah, and then Alison.
You can, something that I found very useful, because for a little while I was considering whether I wanted to practice sort of towards London way, but joining clinical excellence networks, I think, is a really good way to network a little bit more in the areas that you're in, and maybe get a little bit familiar with some names. But I do think ultimately, you know, maybe some people do get their jobs through placements in the area, but I mean, I'm thinking about people that were on my course who have spread far and wide. Ultimately, you know, you can apply for any job anywhere, and you'll still be able to go for those interviews. But I definitely think being able to connect with people through those clinical excellence networks has been really useful, and they're really great to have as part of your CV and as something that you can bring to an interview as well. And I think if you go onto the RCSLT website, there's a page that gives you all of the clinical excellence networks, and I've definitely joined a few as well. They're really useful.
Right, thanks, Hannah. And she said earlier there's also going to be a networking session after this one for SEND. So please, if you can, do join that as well. So Sophie, your hand's gone down, or you're okay to talk?
Yes, sorry. I was just gonna add to that. I get lots of messages on LinkedIn where people will often ask if they can come and spend some time in our company and seeing what we do. And that's both student speech therapists and already qualified speech therapists. Don't be afraid to go and ask, you know, those things, introduce yourself to people. Recruiting speech therapists is actually really difficult and is sometimes people don't see the jobs that are out there. So if you make yourself known to a service that you would like to work for, absolutely what I do when we put a job out then is I'll go back through my LinkedIn or my emails and search for those people who have emailed me, and then I will send them directly the link for that job that we've put out. So just make yourself known, make yourself visible.
Thanks, Sophie. And Alison.
Yeah, this isn't going to be relevant to everyone, but I think if the situation is that, say, you've lived and grown up in Buckinghamshire, but you've gone to Leeds to university, and you want to then have your job back in Buckinghamshire where you've where you live and where you've grown up, is to make the links in your holidays, offer to volunteer in the department. But we also in Buckinghamshire we used NHSP, the bank. And we have lots of students who are registered on the bank as SLT assistants, and in their holidays they will come and give us their availability, and if that aligns with us having vacancies, we will then give them paid work through the bank as an assistant, and that's a really good way for us to get to know people who are perhaps who are never going to come into our service on placement because they are not local, and a good way for people who live locally to work out what we're all about as well. So that's an option that people could explore.
Yeah, thanks, Alison. It's a really good option to do that. Hannah, the next question is specifically for you. And a lot of people have been asking this question. So it's, how long were you a band 5 before applying for your band 6?
So I think I was a little bit lucky with my position. So pretty much all of my placement experience was in stroke. I did community stroke, P2 stroke rehab hospital, and then I was on a hyperacute stroke unit in my final placement. On top of that, I absolutely love neurology, and I have known for quite a long time that stroke is an area that I was very keen to specialize in. And I made that quite clear when I started this role. And it kind of just worked out that people were kind of leaving at the right time. So we had several vacancies open up for band 6 stroke roles. So I only applied for it, maybe like a month ago, I think. It came up, and I was very aware that I was still very, very fresh in my career. And there was a lot to do, but my last rotation was in the same team that the band 6 was being, the post was being advertised for. So I spoke to my band 8, our team lead, and said, look, I know it's really early, but you know, what might the barriers be to me applying? You know, am I ready? What kind of things do I need to have in place to be able to do it? At that point, I was already dysphagia trained. I'd signed off all my competencies. I think I managed to fly through that quite quickly just because I had quite good teaching on my master's. And then she said, you know, as long as you know that that's what you want to do, and you're happy that, you know, you'll be out of the rotations and you won't be, you know, getting that other experience, that's fine. I think, you know, clinically, there'll still be support in place if you feel confident in your management. And I think I said, you know, with the amount of experience that I had and with it being such a keen interest, I did feel quite confident in that. So yeah, I applied for it, and I kind of looked at it as a case of, if I'm not ready for it, that will become very apparent in the interview. And at the very least, it will be really good interview experience, and to start getting an understanding of what a band 6 interview is like, what questions they might ask. And I think it genuinely was a case of right place, right time. Yeah, so that's sort of where it is. But I do think it's been quite a quick transition, and I think I'm now feeling a little bit nervous for it. But I'm excited, just because I was dreading having to rotate again, because I just really want to go back into a stroke role. I just love it. So yeah.
Well, many congratulations on it. It's great news. Okay, you talked about interviews a little bit there, Hannah. My next question is, what sort of questions would be appropriate to ask in a pre-interview phone call, or should I just introduce myself at that point? Anybody like to take that one? So what sort of questions would be appropriate to ask in a pre-interview phone call? Because we talked earlier today about it's often really good just to ring the person who's advertising the job and have a chat with them first. What sort of questions would you ask them? So Anna, I'll go to you first and then Sophie.
Usually asking a bit more about the service, trying to find out who we see, who we cover, where we work, wanting to know sort of numbers of people in the team and that sort of thing, just to sort of see if it's sort of appropriate. And then often we will talk about, they'll ask about supervision and support and development opportunities, things they might ask at the interview. But yeah, just getting that understanding usually around what the service is and the organisation they'll be working for.
Thank you. Sophie?
I'd get an idea of what the job role is, the client group that you're going to be working with, and just understand a little bit more possibly about what that role looks like day to day. Because what that's going to allow you to do, if you know that you're going to be working sometimes in mainstream schools, sometimes in special schools, sometimes in nurseries, you're then going to be able to understand, okay, well, I know that I need to know about EHCs. I also know that I need to learn about early language development. It will give you more of a scope to be able to kind of target some of your answers if you're not sure what they're going to be at the interview. I'd also let them know why you'd like to apply for the job. Introduce yourself, tell them a little bit about you, let them know why you'd like to apply for the role. You could also do that via email as well. So even drop in an email, introduce yourself in that, why you'd like to apply for the job, and then ask in that email, is there a time where I can either pop down or I can give you a call? Emails I find are really important because I will go back and search a keyword that I can remember that someone said. I'll think, oh gosh, yeah, that person asked me that. I'm going to make sure that I go back to that. So emails can be a really good thread rather than just giving a phone call.
Thanks, Sophie. All right, I'm going to move on to my next question, which is, in your experiences, will most jobs wait for you? I.e., if you want to take a month off after graduating for a holiday or a break, would most jobs wait for you? That's the question. I know that Tom talked about you've got 2 years once qualified and registered to register, but I guess this question is about jobs waiting for you if you want to take a month's break. Got a few hands up. We'll go to Alison first.
Yeah, I mean, I think under recruitment policies and recruitment law, if you are the best applicant for the job and you are being offered it, there is that option to negotiate your start date. And within reason, we would try and accommodate that. Obviously, if you've applied for a job and then ask not to start it for 6 months, there may be clinical, logistical reasons why we would have to say, unfortunately, we can't accommodate that. But somebody who has a planned holiday for 3 or 4 weeks, it's unlikely to impact that recruitment process.
Thanks, Alison. Grace?
Hiya, yeah, so I just wanted to, this isn't a personal experience, but my friend from university, she wanted to do a few months of traveling, but she still applied for some jobs, and she was just quite open and honest and clear with those interviewing her that that's what she wanted to do, and she kind of explained why, and she got offered a place with one company and they said that they were happy to wait for, I think it was 3 months. So I just think if it's meant to be, it will all work out. I think, Alison, like you said, sometimes it might be tricky to navigate. If it is a longer period of time, it might not work out. But if that's something you want to do, or it's a holiday already booked, if that's kind of has meaning to you and it's not something you want to sacrifice, then I would say don't, because you will find a company that kind of takes you when you're ready. Yeah.
Thanks, Grace. And Sophie?
If I've got an applicant who would like to take either some time off or is not ready to start immediately, if they are the right and the best applicant, then absolutely I'll work around with them, because I never want to lose somebody who could be an amazing speech therapist because they had something else kind of planned or wanted to do something else. What I would say though is I would absolutely much prefer to know at the beginning of the process. Don't be worried that because you say, oh, I'd love to do this job, but actually I'd like to do, or I'm going to do X, Y, and Z. Don't be too afraid that that will mean, okay, well, they'll choose somebody else. Because from my experience, having the right person is way more important. If I recruit somebody else who is not the right person, who's maybe not as good as the person I wanted, I've then got to think about recruitment again further down the line, and I want to avoid that at all costs. I want to keep our staff team, I want it to be coherent, consistent, and if that means waiting, then absolutely that's something that we will do, but it has to be within the scope of what we would consider reasonable. In our private service, we've got contracts that are ready to go and that are waiting, and we're often having therapists that go into them. So we do also have to consider, is that going to have a significant impact if we're having to wait 6 months to put them in a contract? Is that provider going to go elsewhere? So there are some wider considerations, but I would be open and honest about it.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. The next question's an interesting one. It says, what's a mistake you perhaps made which would have been useful to know about beforehand? What mistake have you made which would have been useful to know beforehand? It's an interesting one. I'm not really sure what we're asking here, but Hannah, you're going to be brave enough to answer that one.
I think the first thing that came to mind, I definitely made a couple of mistakes about just in terms of sending referrals to the wrong teams, especially like within the West Midlands. It's really confusing about how you even work out which postcode is covered by which community SLT team and stuff like that. So yeah, there were a few times where I was there being really proactive and doing my referral and thinking, look at me supporting my team, getting these jobs done. And then I just sent it to the completely wrong team, and then it delayed their community input and stuff like that. I will also say as well, from a dysphagia management perspective, there have been times where I have maybe made some mistakes in my judgment. They haven't been too serious, but bedside assessments can be really, really subjective. And sometimes you don't always make the right decision and you can't always be sure of it. But I know the first mistake I made really, really affected me, because I the lady that I assessed had ended up becoming quite unwell afterwards, and she'd aspirated. But again, I was really well supported by my team, and they said, she's okay, she's being managed by the medical team. It's really subjective. There's no way to know concretely sometimes. It was a tricky assessment, so don't worry. But those are two that kind of popped to mind.
Thanks, Hannah, for that. Sophie?
So I can't think directly of ones that maybe have happened to me, but there will be loads. Absolutely, there will be loads, because this is how you learn. You do something and you realise, oh gosh, maybe that wasn't the right way to do it. And that may be the way in which you share information with somebody. Working and leading a diagnostic team means you're often sharing difficult information or having those difficult conversations, introducing an idea to a parent that actually, what do you think about exploring an autism diagnosis or an ADHD assessment? And there's ways in which you can have those conversations. I work a lot with my therapists, and they will often say, can you come with me whilst I have this conversation? And that's okay to do, because my therapists also get things wrong every time. And I suppose it's about you feeling safe to make those mistakes, as long as they are not too severe and have too significant consequences. But what I would absolutely recommend is reflecting on that, because I know my therapist will come to me and they've been worrying about something all day. They've been in a school, something's happened, and they've been worrying all day. I tell them, tell me immediately, let's just have that phone call. You will be settled, because I will be able to talk you through, okay, let's evaluate what's happened. Let's think about what we do different next time. And then how is that going to change your clinical practice moving forward? And that will happen throughout your entire career. And that is completely typical, but it's about how you reflect, how you respond, but also how you take accountability for it.
Thanks, Sophie. Hannah, do you want to come back in?
I just wanted to add on to that as well, insofar as, I think, like you said, Sophie, it's the accountability. When you make that mistake, you need to kind of own it and use that as a learning opportunity. So I know certainly with me in that dysphagia case, immediately I took that to my clinical supervision. I discussed it. I learned from it, okay, what do I need to consider moving forward, you know, and just making sure, I think what, especially our supervisors, what they're looking for is for you to be able to identify a mistake and identify the learning outcomes from it to make sure that that doesn't happen again. And I think, yeah, certainly rely, like, depending on, well, talking about it with your peers and with your supervisors, I would say it's sort of the first port of call if you do make a mistake, no matter what it is.
Thank you. How soon can you specialize in something? For example, I'm really interested in stammering. Do I search immediately or do some research searching once I'm in a role? So someone who's, well, a number of people who want to think about specializing in a specific role, when do they apply for it? I'll go to Grace and then Sophie and then Alison. Grace.
I might not be the best person to answer this, but I just put my hand up because when I initially started applying, I was really interested in stammering as well. And I know there are certain pathway positions in the NHS. So I applied for a band 5 pathway for stammering, and then I was unsuccessful because I didn't have enough experience, but they offered me a pathway for the ASD pathway because that was just kind of the experience I had. So I know that there are certain pathways you can apply to. In the end, I took the job at Cognos, and like I said in my presentation, I work across a whole range of different schools. Until my competencies are done, I will probably remain across a range of schools in the mainstream specialist schools just to give me enough evidence for my competencies. But you can definitely flag up and say, I'm really interested in this area. I really like working in the specialist schools or in the ASD base. I would like going forward after my competencies are done to maybe increase my caseload at that school and have conversations like that with your supervisor. Equally, I think the first speech assessment I did was a couple of weeks ago. So I went a whole year without touching phonetics, which I didn't think would happen. But actually I really enjoyed it. So that's something that I'll be asking to do some more of. So yeah, I think it's just being honest with what you really enjoy. And if you're not on a specific pathway, just kind of have that conversation with your supervisor, let them know what you really enjoy and maybe what you want to do a little bit less of, and hopefully they should accommodate.
Thanks, Grace. The thing with Zoom is they don't have the numbers by the hand, so you don't know who's come up first and second. But I'm just going to go Alison, Sophie, and then Hannah on this question. Alison.
Thank you. I think there's pros and cons to taking both viewpoints on this. That actually, if, as Hannah was describing earlier, you have had such a brilliant experience, you're passionate about an area of care, and you get the opportunity to continue and move in that direction, then of course you should grab it with both hands. But there are distinct advantages for not specialising too quickly, becoming a very well-rounded therapist, particularly in the adult world. I'm just going to say that you're a better acute therapist if you've worked in the community, and you're a better community therapist if you've worked in acute, because you have seen the whole pathway, and it does change the way you practice. So pros and cons to both, but do bear in mind that if you want to really develop broadly and become the best therapist you can, embrace all opportunities and all experiences.
Thanks, Alison. Sophie and then Hannah.
What I would say is that kind of reiterates what Alison said, was that if you are going to say your specialism that you want to go into is autism, you are going to have to know about language, because autism is such a broad spectrum. You're going to get children who are non-speaking, you're going to get children who are fully verbal. So you need to understand language as well. So having a really good understanding of language in general is going to be essential for most of your paediatric roles. And that's going to associate with stammering, with speech sounds, because you're going to get children who have got co-occurrences, and that is very, very common. I would say, and this is the opposite advice to actually what I did, I took a pretty unique approach to my speech and language therapy career, but have had a really clear trajectory of where I wanted to get to, but already owned early years provisions, so kind of made that journey a lot easier for me, would be to get your broad skills really good, because if we're then going to add on top of that knowledge about autism and to teach you specifically about social communication and the difference between social communication and social interaction, and then the repetitive and the restrictive behaviours, you're going to need to have a really good understanding of language and sensory to kind of add those things on top. So do things a bit more broadly, possibly first, and that doesn't need to be long. That can literally be 12 months, and then advocate, even at interview, say, this is something that I'm really interested in. I want to kind of develop my skills generally, but I'd really like one of my goals to be X, Y, or Z.
Mine is, my point
Yeah.
was adding on all of that, which is the fact that people have comorbidities. They don't just have one thing. In an acute setting, to kind of like provide context, you know, I'll have a stroke patient that also has a background of motor neuron disease. I have a stroke patient that's got dementia, Parkinson's. They've ended up with an acquired stammer. You know, there are such a number of things that can happen that require a level of expertise. So, you know, again, it's against what I have done, but I do think, you know, gaining as much and as broad experience as you can will only develop your skills more. Yeah, and I guess the good news is as well is that if you do specialize early and you do come across someone where you're like, oh, like I, for example, with me, I'd have very little understanding of managing a stammer, but I know one of my colleagues has had quite a lot of experience. So using those kind of you know, the expertise within the team and emailing, and you'll still be able to manage it, but just saying, hi, this is the case. Have you got any recommendations at all of how you'd manage this? So
Thanks, Hannah. Anna?
Also, just to say, where we have had some staff who've specialised early, like stroke, they've kind of identified that they would like to do a little bit more in the main team, and we facilitated that. And I think that saying yes to doing all sorts of things, I've done. I've worked in quite a lot of different areas, and I've realised I was the one in my team that had worked in all the different sort of parts and worked over in the acute, because we always have staffing issues. So there's usually some sort of flexibility to go and cover something somewhere to get a bit more experience. And I think if you want to develop up and sort of, I guess, thinking of management and things like that, that it's really helpful to have a really broad base.
Yeah, absolutely. Great, thank you. All right, moving on to the next one. Is it easy as an NQP Band 5 to request part-time positions? There's one for the managers. Anna.
Yeah, I think it's just to bear in mind where you take on a part-time position, it may take you a bit longer to get through your competencies. I would, you know, let the person know. Obviously, the job is advertised full-time. Sort of highlight that, perhaps giving them a call and seeing they would consider it part-time. Again, you don't know what other monies that manager might have sitting around that they could perhaps created a band, you know, a 3-day-a-week Band 5 or something, and have something else out. So I would always sort of approach and highlight your interests, but just be aware that you're working maybe half as long as somebody else. So it might take you longer to develop sort of in some of those areas.
Thank you. Sophie and then Alison.
I think if the job is advertised as full-time, there's no harm in asking. But if it is advertised as full-time, it's just being aware that if it's a full-time post, then that company or the trust would need then 2 therapists to kind of run that role. That being said, all of our jobs that we put out, there's capacity for term time only or all year round working. We're quite flexible with that. And in cases, absolutely, we'll make reasonable adjustments to accommodate somebody if I feel that they are the right person. But sometimes in our roles, if you're needing to work quite independently and then you are asking for 3 days a week, some of my concerns possibly may be, are you able to get enough clinical experience and support to be able to move into that independent role as quickly as we need you to be able to as a company, because it's going to take twice as long for you to achieve that.
Okay, thank you. And Alison.
Yeah, this is a really tricky one. The NHS, I'm talking about NHS, not private companies, has got much, much better at flexible working policies and guidance for employees and employers. And certainly our trust advertises all of its jobs as open for flexible working. But as a manager, you have to balance what somebody wants to work with the needs of your service and the financial challenges that we do experience. So if you put a job out as a whole-time equivalent and someone would like it at 0.8, that is really tricky, because what is left behind is 0.2, which doesn't equate to a job. So I think you've got to really have those conversations openly and honestly about, can you work a 9-day fortnight or a longer day on some days of the week if you're trying to achieve a day a week off, and think about all flexible working options that might be easier for a service to accommodate. So it's a massive balance, and I think it does involve direct, honest communication about why you're applying for the job and what you might be able to offer, and how that aligns with what the service needs to provide.
Okay, yeah, really important. Thank you. What would you say is the biggest sorry, I'll start again. What would you say are the biggest pros and cons of working in a rotational post as an NQP? Rotational posts. Jade.
Yeah, so we have the 3 rotations. We're there 6 months, so we have 6 months rotations. What I really enjoy about it is I get to kind of have experience in lots of different areas. So I think that's really helped with kind of my knowledge, and I've kind of seen that progress as I've gone through. So I started with kind of a lot more knowledge on stroke. That's kind of where my background comes from placement. But then had the opportunity to develop a lot more knowledge in kind of more neurological basis there, was quite supported. But then moving on to kind of the general, I learned a lot more about how gastro can infect on dysphagia, a lot more knowledge around that. And equally then moving now to voice, how you look a little bit more in that and how that affects all the solid. So I did get a lot more broader experience. Sometimes 6 months does not feel like a long time to be in that one post. So you have them lots of transitions. It's almost like starting a new job each time. So you set off, we do handovers, but then it's kind of wrapping up your caseload to then hand over to someone else. And then it's kind of that transition back in. So sometimes that can be, at first, the first transition you do can feel like quite a lot. But I think that's where having the other band 5s there that have done that rotation, sharing that experience, can be helpful.
Brilliant. No, thank you, Jade. Moving on to the next question is, when at university we have to do extensive planning for sessions, how do you plan when you have a job and you're qualified? Is it similar, or do you simplify it? So planning for work compared to planning when at uni. Oh, lots of hands. I have no idea who come up first. I'm just going to go around. I'm going to go to Taslima first and then Grace.
Right. Okay. So yeah. So if you remember my presentation, I said the real job is actually completely different to like placement, and it really is. So the way I would plan for my session is just before I'm about to see the patient, like half an hour before, I'll read the referral, and if there's any sort of like advice sheets, resources that I need to print out, I think will be really good, obvious, just from the referral. If it's very obvious, I'll have them ready. But at the same, I'll be basically planning my session out, what assessments I might need, have them all out, what toys I might need to get out. And yeah, just think about, the questions that you're going to need to ask to find out, investigate more about the condition, how it's impacting in the family, at school, etc. So, and then yeah, you just do your session and then you write up everything. So it is very different to it's more quicker paced on your job.
And I guess the more experienced you become, the easier or less time it takes to do that as you get more experience. So yeah, absolutely. Grace?
Yeah, I remember being on placement and having to complete these really extensive tables where you'd write out each target and exactly what resources you'd use and how you'd step it up, how you'd step it down. And I think that is extremely valuable and really important to do and to build the basics of those thought processes. But when you start, it's going to seem daunting because you're not going to have as much time to plan, but actually you have those thought processes in your head, so it becomes a lot quicker. So for example, I get in about half an hour earlier before my sessions start in the morning, and I will draw on resources that are in the cupboard. I've got kind of my go-tos that I know work, I know the children love. I have a big box and I put my things in the box. I have a visual timetable, and I just kind of pull those things together that morning, have a look at their targets, make sure that I'm kind of working on the right things. If you'd have told me that I would be doing that a year ago when I started, I'd think, no, that's terrifying. When I first started, my caseload was smaller, so I did have more time to plan as I was getting to know the children. But you do pick up those skills really quite quickly, and it does become easier, but it does take time. I think in terms of my job, I have a caseload and I see the same students every term. So I have that kind of, I guess it's easier for me because I get to know the children and I build up a rapport and I learn what they like, what they don't like, what their targets are, what next steps are. But just know that you're building the skills now at uni and it will fall into place. It seems scary, but you will manage it.
Reassuring words, Grace. Thank you. Hannah's hand's gone down. Sophie and then Jade.
So I can remember being at university, having to write my goals, my evidence base for them, the step up and the step down. And absolutely, the step up and step down, I would say, is going to be one of the most important things that you can learn, because you may see, and the referral information that you get may literally just be that a 3-year-old child with limited language is coming into your session. You need to be able to understand, okay, well, I think that I'm going to do the DLS, or I might do the TELC assessment. If then that child walks in and they are non-speaking and autistic, you possibly won't be able to do those assessments, and you are going to need to do something observationally to get that information. So preparing for your sessions is going to be really important. I would say go in early. Still now, I am quite obsessive over it, in that I will read the client's notes or information about the client either the night before or the morning of. I don't then do much preparation other than knowing I've got all my resources in the room and kind of will just go with the flow, typically because I am working for the majority with non-speaking little ones. In terms of like setting your therapy goals, something I do with my whole team is get them to think about the intent of the session. So what goals and what do you want from the session, the implementation of it, so how are you going to deliver it, and then the impact of that. So kind of not being too focused on I need to do this because this is the evidence base and I need to get X out of it. Your therapy goal is going to be, you're going to be working on it. You're not going to achieve that in one session. So relax a little bit with it and think a bit more broadly about, okay, I can implement this in all these different ways. When you start thinking about that, that then will form your recommendations too, because you'll be thinking about your goal and these are all the ways that you can implement that. So then when you're feeding back to a parent, a teacher, whoever, your implementation of how you are delivering just starts to form your recommendations. But no, you absolutely don't write goals to the level of detail that you do at university, but it is really important to have that internal structure.
Thanks, Sophie. Jade, on final one for this question.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think it is. So especially as well, we work with assistants that deliver therapy as well. So it's kind of making sure that they have the understanding of that therapy plan. So it isn't, I was very used to say even on placement, I spend that time looking at all the evidence, kind of adding it all in. And now I don't get me wrong, you still review the evidence base but you don't always get time to kind of tally all of that up. What I found quite helpful is kind of having almost like a bank of kind of how I'm going to structure it. So I've got a goal bank, always discuss that in the session. So kind of agreeing the goals with them. But also knowing that I've got something available. I know all the resources that are there, but also knowing that sometimes it doesn't go to plan. You can have this plan in your head of like, I've got this therapy plan, but knowing that there is some adaptation sometimes, and you're learning from, okay, why is this not working? How can I adapt it a little bit more? I think a tip that I've found, because it used to take me a little bit of while to get my notes together and the therapy plan. So now I structure some time, but try and set kind of a goal of how long it's going to take me to do that. But also kind of have my therapy plan almost in a kind of soap note format. So it's there for my next session. So I'm kind of ready to go. It helps with my time management a little bit as well. But yeah, just don't be afraid to adapt equally as well.
Thank you. There was a question about research there. I see Sarah Lambert's on call from our research team. Sarah was just asking about whether NQPs could get involved in research. I don't know if I'm sorry, I'm putting you on the spot a bit, but
no, that's no problem at all. I'm glad you did that, Steve, because I've just joined in time for we're going to be available in the next networking session to talk to anyone who wants to know about research. So and sort of maintaining that in their career. So I'll put a couple of links in the chat as well, just for anyone that obviously, I understand some people may really want to go and have their lunch or have other things that they want to do. So I was going to pop a couple of links in the chat. And also just to say, because I think evidence-based practice kind of came into that question as well, as part of all the sort of resources and things that have been put out for this day today, we've done just a little kind of one-pager kind of top tips for evidence-based practice, just to kind of help you with that transition of kind of maintaining those skills and things as you go into clinical practice. And as always, just keep in touch with us at the RCSLT if you're looking for any support with that.
Brilliant. Thank you, Sarah. That's really helpful. So I'm just looking at a list of questions. Is it appropriate to ask an interview if there would be one or more NQPs working alongside you in the role that you're applying for? Alison, I saw you nodding your head. Do you want to comment? Do you want to respond to that? So we go to Alison and then Anna and then Grace.
Well, yeah, absolutely. Ask about everyone who's around to support you. I guess the question is specifically about NQPs because you can brainstorm together, work together, and so asking about the peer support, but also thinking a bit wider if you're applying to a small service that maybe doesn't have another NQP SLT, asking is there an NQP physio, OT, what's the preceptorship program, how can you meet up with other people who are exploring their first role in healthcare. So it may not always be that there's another SLT, but there almost certainly will be another healthcare professional, education professional, if it's not the healthcare world, that you can link with.
First time I've done it today. Speaking when I'm muted. There you go. Grace.
Yeah, just echoing what you said, Alison, really. That's something that I found so reassuring as in my experience as an NQP, was being introduced to other NQPs or for example, when I started, there was a girl who just completed her competencies. So she'd just gone through the process that I was about to start. Ask, I would say as well, about peer supervision and what that might look like, because you'll likely be paired or grouped with other NQPs or those at a similar level to you. But definitely, I think that's a great question to ask, and it really kind of reassures you to speak to people at a similar level versus spending all of your time with your supervisor, for example, which is great and beneficial, but there's a big gap and it can feel quite scary, like, oh, how can I get to that level? I don't feel like I'm as experienced as that. You're just not at that point yet, and that's okay. So having people around that are the same point as you is really helpful.
Thank you. Thanks, Grace. There was a question about how do you apply for a student and SEN. If you can join, I'll see Alison's just joined as well. Alison is having a session directly after this on SEN, so please, hopefully you can stay on and join Alison's SEN discussion after these. I think we've run out of time for all of the questions, but it's great to see lots of the team joining us as well from RCSLT. So there will be all the session after 1 o'clock as well. It's really just for me to, first of all, thank all of the speakers today for their presentations, the NQP panel, Taslima, Grace, Hannah and Jade, and the managers panel with Alison, Sophie, Anna and Debbie. And thank you all so much for your time. I know it's a big chunk of time out, but I know that the NQPs and the students who've been here today, and I see we've had over 400 at one stage. It's great that they've been able to hear from you and your experiences. So really happy to, I'm really pleased to thank you all for doing that. As I said right at the beginning, the evaluation is so important for us to make sure that even next year will be even better than today. So please just scan that and put in your comments on today's session. And thank you very much. I also just want to say thank you again to all of the organisers, all the students on our planning group for all of their help, and of course the events team who've done so much of the background work and organising up to date. Thank you so much for that too. And lastly, I'd just like to thank LPlan again for sponsoring the event and providing their courses to support you on your NQP journey. So thank you all for attending today, and there will be the networking session which will take place between now 1 o'clock and 2 o'clock this afternoon. I'd really encourage you all to join that and hear from SEN research and other teams, and just wish you all really the best in your journey in the profession. And as we all said throughout the day, RCSLT is your membership organisation. It's your organisation. We want you to be part of it and to help us to develop all of our work in speech and language therapy. So please do get involved with this in any way that you feel able to, and anything at all, just drop one of us an email and we'd be happy to come back to you and support you in any way we can do. So thank you all so much, and hopefully you'll be able to now join the networking session. As you see, there's got the you've got it in front of you now on the slide, and enjoy your lunch and the networking, and thank you all so very much. Thank you. Bye.